The letter trembled in Caleb Boone's weathered hands as moonlight spilled across the words that would change everything. She's different from the others, old friend. This one carries secrets that could destroy you both, or save you. 5 days later, when Evelyn Hart stepped off that dusty Wyoming stagecoach, her haunted eyes meeting his for the first time, Caleb had no idea that within hours, her confession would leave him sleepless until dawn, his hands shaking not from fear, but from a rage so pure it threatened to consume the very man he'd fought to become. Friends, if you're watching this story unfold from your corner of the world, drop a comment about your city below. I'd love to know how far these frontier tales have traveled. The Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal across the barren plains, carrying with it the bite of an early autumn that promised a brutal winter ahead. Caleb Boone stood on the porch of his ranch house, a structure more fortress than home, built with his own hands from timber he'd hauled down from the mountains. Each log bore the scars of his labor, just as his soul bore the scars of a life lived in violence. At 34, Caleb looked 10 years older. The war had aged him first those terrible years when brother fought brother, and the very soul of the nation bled into mud-soaked battlefields. Then came the bounty hunting years, tracking men through territories where law was more suggestion than fact, where justice came from the barrel of a gun, and mercy was a luxury few could afford. His face told these stories in lines etched deep around storm-gray eyes that had seen too much in the permanent furrow between his brows, in the way his mouth had forgotten how to smile without irony. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, carried by a mail rider who'd looked nervous just approaching Caleb's property. People in town still whispered about him, the man who'd brought in the Morrison gang single-handed, who'd faced down 6 men in Laramie and walked away without a scratch while they lay bleeding in the dust. They called him many things, killer, guardian, ghost. But his old army friend Marcus had simply called him a man in need of saving. "Dear Caleb," Marcus had written in his careful script, "I know you'll tear this letter up the moment you realize what I'm suggesting, but I'm asking you to read it through. There's a woman, a widow named Evelyn Hart, who needs a new start. Before you say no, know this, she's not looking for love or comfort. She's looking for survival, same as you. The difference is she might actually deserve it." Caleb had indeed nearly burned the letter. A mail-order bride. The very thought was absurd. What could he offer a woman except a life of isolation on a ranch 50 miles from the nearest town, with a man whose hands were only good for 2 things, working the land and dealing death? But Marcus had been persistent as only a friend who'd saved your life could be. 2 more letters followed, each revealing more about this mysterious widow. 23 years old, no family left, her husband dead a year, circumstances unclear but suspicious. And then the line that had finally broken through Caleb's resistance. "She's running from something, Caleb. Maybe you two can run together, or better yet, maybe you can finally stop running." So here he stood on this October afternoon with the sun bleeding red across the horizon, waiting for a stagecoach that would bring a stranger into his carefully constructed solitude. He'd cleaned the house for the first time in months, cleared out the smaller bedroom that had served as storage for ammunition and supplies. He'd even attempted to repair the kitchen table, though his hand so steady with a gun proved clumsy with delicate work. The sound came first, wheels creaking over the rutted trail, horses snorting with exhaustion. The stagecoach appeared like a ghost ship emerging from a dust cloud, rocking dangerously as it navigated the rough approach to his ranch. Caleb didn't move from the porch, his posture relaxed but ready, a habit from years of living on the edge of violence. The coach pulled to a stop 30 feet from the house, and the driver, old Pete from town, tipped his hat nervously. "Got your delivery, Mr. Boone," he called out, already reaching to help someone down from the coach. She emerged slowly, carefully, as if testing whether the ground would hold her. The first thing Caleb noticed was how small she was, barely 5 feet, delicate as a bird. But there was something in the way she held herself, spine straight, despite obvious exhaustion, chin lifted, despite what had to be fear that spoke of a different kind of strength. Evelyn Hart was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too thin, her cheekbones too sharp, as if life had carved away everything soft and unnecessary. Her hair, a dark auburn that caught fire in the dying light, was pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to soften her features. But her eyes, God, her eyes were something else entirely. Green as spring grass, they held depths that seemed to go on forever, filled with shadows and secrets and a wariness that Caleb recognized like looking in a mirror. She wore a traveling dress of brown wool practical and worn, but meticulously clean. Her hands clutched around a small carpet bag were covered in cheap cotton gloves that couldn't quite hide the way they trembled. Everything about her spoke of poverty faced with dignity, of someone who'd learned to make do with little and expect even less. "Mrs. Hart," Caleb said, stepping down from the porch. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone beyond the necessary transactions in town. "Mr. Boone," she replied, and her voice surprised him, low, musical, with a slight accent he couldn't place. Southern, maybe, but softened by time and distance. "Thank you for—" She paused, seeming to search for words, "for this opportunity." Opportunity. Such a formal word for what was essentially a business transaction wrapped in the pretense of marriage. Marcus had been clear in his letters, this was to be a marriage of convenience. She needed protection and a home. He needed... Well, Marcus seemed to think he needed someone to remind him he was human. Old Pete unloaded a single trunk from the coach, setting it down with obvious relief. "That's everything," he said, already climbing back up to his seat. The old man clearly wanted to be away before dark, before the shadows grew long, and the reputation of Caleb Boone became more than whispered stories. "Wait," Evelyn said suddenly, turning to the driver. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for everything during the journey." The old man's face softened slightly. "You take care, miss or ma'am. You need anything, you send word to town." It was a kind offer, but they all knew the truth. Nobody would come out here unless absolutely necessary. The Boone Ranch existed on the edge of civilization, a place where the normal rules of society faded into the wild. As the stagecoach disappeared into the growing darkness, an awkward silence settled between them. Caleb picked up her trunk, noting how light it was. Everything she owned in the world, probably, and it weighed less than his saddle. "I'll show you to your room," he said, leading the way into the house. The main room was large but sparse. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center, and a single rocking chair sat near the window. No decorations, no softness anywhere. It was a space that served function over form, shelter over home. Evelyn followed him silently through the room and down a short hallway. He pushed open the door to what would be her room, a small space with a narrow bed, a dresser he'd hastily repaired, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. He'd added a quilt he'd bought in town, the only new thing in the room, its bright colors jarring against the austere surroundings. "It's not much," he said, setting down her trunk. "It's more than enough," she replied, and something in her tone suggested she meant it. "Mr. Boone, I think we should discuss expectations." He turned to face her, leaning against the doorframe. In the dim light filtering through the window, she looked even more fragile, but that steel in her spine remained. "Marcus told me you weren't looking for a real marriage," she continued, her cheeks coloring slightly but her gaze steady. "I want you to know that suits me perfectly. I can cook, clean, tend a garden if the soil allows. I can earn my keep without complications." Complications. Another carefully chosen word to dance around the reality of what typically happened between husbands and wives. Caleb found himself oddly relieved and disappointed in equal measure. "I rise before dawn," he said. "I work the ranch during the day. I don't talk much. I don't go to town socials or church. Sometimes I'm gone for days checking the herds or hunting. You'll be alone a lot." "Being alone doesn't frighten me," she said softly. "Being with the wrong person does." There was weight in those words, a history she wasn't ready to share. Caleb understood. They all had histories better left buried. "Supper's usually at sundown," he said, moving away from the door. "There's preserved meat and some vegetables in the root cellar. I didn't know what you'd need." "I'll manage," she assured him. "I'm quite resourceful." He left her then to settle in, returning to the main room where he built up the fire against the growing cold. Through the thin walls, he could hear her moving around, the soft rustle of clothing being unpacked, the creak of dresser drawers opening. Such foreign sounds in a house that had known only silence for so long. When she emerged an hour later, she'd changed into a simpler dress of gray wool and had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Her hair was still severely pulled back, but a few strands had escaped, softening her face marginally. She moved into the kitchen area with purpose, examining the supplies with a practiced eye. "When did you last have a proper meal?" she asked, not looking at him. Caleb tried to remember. He ate when hungry, usually dried meat and hard biscuits, sometimes beans, if he bothered to cook them. "Can't say." She made a sound that might have been disapproval or pity. "Well, that changes tonight." He watched from his chair by the fire as she worked, noting the efficiency of her movements, the way she seemed to make the inadequate supplies stretch into something more. Within an hour, the smell of cooking filled the house, onions and preserved meat transformed into stew. Day-old bread toasted and buttered, even a pot of coffee that didn't taste like tar. They ate in silence, sitting across from each other at the repaired table. Caleb found himself stealing glances at her, trying to read the story written in the careful way she held her spoon, the slight flinch when he moved too suddenly, the way she kept her eyes downcast unless directly addressed. "This is good," he said, finally, the words feeling rusty. "The food. It's good." "Thank you." A tiny smile flickered across her face there and gone like a candle in wind. "My mother taught me. She always said a good meal could civilize any situation." "Your mother, is she dead?" 3 years now." The words were flat matter of fact. "Father, too. The fever took them both within days of each other." "I'm sorry." She shrugged slightly. "Life takes what it wants. We just try to survive what's left." After dinner, she cleaned while he tended to the evening chores, checking the horses, securing the barn, walking the perimeter as he did every night. The moon was rising full and bright, casting shadows that could hide threats or reveal them depending on how well you knew how to look. When he came back inside, she was sitting by the fire with a piece of mending in her lap. One of his shirts, he realized that had been torn for months. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I like to keep my hands busy," she replied, not looking up. "Idle hands lead to idle thoughts, and idle thoughts lead to remembering things better forgotten." He understood that too. It's why he worked himself to exhaustion every day. Why he volunteered for the hardest jobs, the longest rides. Anything to keep the memories at bay, the faces of men he'd killed, the sounds of battle, the weight of survival when so many others hadn't. "Mr. Boone," she said suddenly, "may I ask you something?" He grunted what might have been agreement. "Why did you agree to this? A man like you with a successful ranch, you could have any woman in the territory. Why take in a stranger with nothing to offer but housework?" Caleb stared into the fire, weighing his words. "Maybe because I'm tired of people looking at me like I might kill them at any moment. Maybe because Marcus was right, I need reminding that there's more to life than survival. Or maybe because I understand what it's like to need to disappear." She absorbed this quietly, her needle never stopping its rhythmic motion through the fabric. "And you?" he asked, surprising himself. "Why agree to marry a man with my reputation?" Her hand stilled for just a moment. "Because sometimes the devil you don't know is safer than the devil you do. And because Marcus promised me you were a good man who'd lost his way. Not a bad man, pretending to be good." "Marcus sees what he wants to see." "Perhaps. Or perhaps he sees what you've forgotten how to see." They sat in companionable silence after that, the fire crackling between them, the wind picking up outside. It was, Caleb realized, the most peaceful evening he'd had in years. No tension coiling in his gut, no constant alertness for danger. Just quiet companionship with someone who understood that sometimes silence said more than words. When the clock, a luxury he'd bought years ago in a moment of weakness, struck 9, Evelyn rose. "I should retire. The journey was long." "Of course." She paused at the hallway entrance. "Mr. Boone, Caleb, thank you for taking this chance. I know it couldn't have been easy." Before he could respond, she was gone, her door closing softly behind her. Caleb remained by the fire, nursing a glass of whiskey he'd poured but hadn't touched. The house felt different with her in it, fuller somehow, as if her presence had awakened something that had been sleeping. He was still sitting there when the screaming started. The sound tore through the quiet like a blade, high and terrified. Caleb was moving before conscious thought kicked in his gun somehow in his hand as he crossed the room in 3 strides. He threw open her door, ready for intruders, for danger, for anything except what he found. Evelyn was alone, thrashing in her narrow bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare so violent it had tangled her in the sheets. Her face was twisted in terror, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she was speaking no pleading with someone who wasn't there. "Please, no more. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Please don't." Caleb holstered his gun and approached carefully, knowing from his own experience with night terrors that waking someone too suddenly could be dangerous. "Evelyn," he said firmly but gently, "Mrs. Hart, you're safe. You're dreaming." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment she didn't seem to see him, still caught between sleeping horror and waking reality. Then recognition dawned, and with it a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "I'm sorry," she gasped, pulling the tangled sheets up to her chin. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. I haven't. It's been months since—" "Don't apologize," Caleb said, maintaining his distance, but not leaving. "We all have our demons that come calling in the night." She was shaking violently, her teeth chattering despite the warm evening. Caleb recognized the aftermath of trauma, the way the body continued to react even after the mind knew the danger had passed. "Would you like some tea?" he offered, feeling helpless in the face of her distress. "Or whiskey? Sometimes it helps." "Tea," she whispered. "Please." He left her to compose herself, busying himself with heating water and finding the tea she'd apparently brought with her. When he returned with the steaming mug, she'd lit the lamp and was sitting up in bed, the quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her face was composed now, but her eyes still held that haunted quality that spoke of horrors relived. "Thank you," she said, accepting the mug with hands that still trembled slightly. Caleb pulled the room's single chair over and sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "God knows I have nights where the past won't stay buried, but if you need to talk—" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, staring into her tea as if it held absolution, she began to speak. "My husband, my late husband, was not a kind man." The words came slowly, carefully, as if she was testing their weight. "I was 17 when we married. My parents had just died and I had nothing, no money, no family, nowhere to go. Thomas Hart seemed like salvation. He was older, established, wealthy by our small town standards. Everyone said I was lucky." She took a sip of tea and Caleb noticed the way her fingers tightened on the mug knuckles, white with pressure. "The first time he hit me was on our wedding night." She continued, her voice eerily calm now. "I had displeased him somehow. I can't even remember what I did wrong. Perhaps I cried too much, or not enough. After that, it became a game for him, finding new ways to break me. Physical pain was almost easier to bear than the other things the words meant to destroy, the systematic removal of anything that brought me joy, the constant fear of setting him off." Caleb's hands had clenched into fists without his awareness. He forced them to relax, keeping his expression neutral, even as rage, cold and familiar, settled in his chest. "For 6 years I lived like that," Evelyn said. 6 years of learning to be invisible, to anticipate his moods, to perfect the art of survival. I became an expert at hiding bruises, at explaining away injuries, at smiling when inside I was screaming. "What happened to him?" Caleb asked, though he suspected he knew. "He died," she said simply. "A hunting accident, they called it. He was cleaning his gun and it went off." She looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. Nobody questioned it. Thomas had many enemies, and I think people knew what he was, even if they never said anything. Does it matter?" she interrupted softly. "He's dead. I'm alive. But his brother Samuel—" She shuddered. "Samuel is worse. He wanted me to marry him, said it was his right as Thomas's brother. When I refused and ran, he swore he'd find me, that I belonged to his family, that I had debts to pay." "Is he looking for you?" "Probably. The Hart family doesn't like to lose their possessions, and that's all I ever was to them, property." The full picture was becoming clear now. This wasn't just a woman seeking a new start. This was a woman in hiding, using marriage as a shield against those who would claim her. "If he comes here," Caleb began. "He won't," she said quickly. "I was careful. I used a different name traveling here, covered my tracks. And even if he did—" She paused, then looked at him with those green eyes that held such depths. Marcus told me what you are, what you've done. I'm not proud of using your reputation as protection, but I'm not above it either. Survival makes pragmatists of us all. Caleb stood the chair scraping against the floor. You're not using me, he said firmly. This is a bargain fair and square. You need protection I need, something I can't quite name yet. But if this Samuel Hart comes looking for you, he'll find more than he bargained for. You don't know him. I know his type, Caleb interrupted. Men who prey on those they see as weak, who mistake kindness for permission to destroy. I've put plenty of such men in the ground, and I'd sleep just fine adding one more. Something flickered across her face. Relief, perhaps, or maybe recognition of a kindred spirit who understood that sometimes violence was the only answer to violence. I should let you sleep, he said, moving toward the door. Caleb, she called softly. He turned back. The nightmares. Do they ever stop? He considered lying, offering comfort he couldn't guarantee, but she deserved truth. No, he said, but they visit less often when you're not alone. He left then, returning to his own room, but not to sleep. Instead, he sat by his window watching the moonlit landscape and thinking about the woman in the next room. She'd survived 6 years of hell and come out the other side still standing. That took a kind of strength. He understood the strength of those who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves from the fragments. His hands were steady now as he cleaned his guns by lamplight, a ritual that usually calmed his mind. But tonight his thoughts kept returning to her words, to the matter-of-fact way she'd described her abuse to the name Samuel Hart that now sat on his mental list of potential threats. He told her the truth. If Hart came, he'd handle it. But what surprised him was the fervor of his reaction, the immediate and visceral need to protect this woman he'd known for mere hours. It wasn't attraction exactly, though she had a quiet grace that drew the eye. It was something else, something about the way she'd asked if the nightmares ever stopped, as if she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it from someone else who lived with the same ghosts. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing across the yard. October in Wyoming was unpredictable warm during the day, but with winter lurking just beyond the horizon, ready to pounce. He'd need to prepare better this year with 2 people to keep warm and fed through the long, brutal months ahead. 2 people. The thought still seemed surreal. For 5 years he'd lived alone on this ranch, building it from nothing into something substantial. 300 head of cattle, 24 horses, enough land to expand if he chose. He'd done it through sheer will and bloody-minded determination, working 18-hour days, learning from every mistake, fighting off rustlers and claim jumpers with a ferocity that had become legend. But what was the point of building something if there was no one to share it with? He'd never thought about it in those terms before, but Evelyn's presence had already begun to shift something in his perspective. The house that had been merely shelter suddenly seemed to need improvement. The sparse furnishings that had never bothered him now appeared inadequate. A sound from her room made him tense, not a scream this time, but movement. Through the thin walls, he could hear her getting up the soft pad of bare feet on wood floors. The kitchen pump squeaked as she got water. Then silence again. He wondered if she was sitting in the dark, unable to return to sleep, wrestling with her own memories. He wondered if she regretted coming here, trading one form of isolation for another. Marcus had painted him as some sort of salvation, but Caleb knew better. He was just a damaged man offering shelter to a damaged woman, both of them hoping that 2 broken halves might somehow make something whole. The clock in the main room chimed midnight, then 1, then 2. Still, Caleb sat keeping watch, as he had so many nights during the war, as he had tracking dangerous men through dangerous territory. But this felt different. This wasn't about staying alert for external threats. This was about being present, being a guardian, not just of physical safety, but of something more fragile, the possibility of peace. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten, with the first hint of dawn, exhaustion won. He lay fully clothed on his bedgun, within reach, as always, and let his eyes close. His last coherent thought was of green eyes that held too much pain and not enough hope, and a silent vow to maybe somehow change that balance. He woke 3 hours later to the smell of coffee and bacon, the sound of quiet humming drifting from the kitchen. It was such a domestic scene that for a moment he wondered if he was still dreaming. But no, Evelyn was there, moving around his kitchen as if she'd always belonged there, her hair still perfectly pinned despite the night's turmoil. "Good morning," she said without turning, somehow sensing he was there. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep and cooking helps me think." "I don't mind," he said, his voice rough with sleep. The table was set for two, something that hadn't happened since he'd built the house. There were even wildflowers in a jar. Where had she found those? They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the early morning sun streaming through windows that she'd apparently cleaned while he slept. The house already looked different, lighter somehow, as if her presence had chased away some of the shadows that had accumulated over the years. "I thought I'd work on the garden today," she said as she cleared the plates. "The soil behind the house looks workable, and it's not too late to plant winter vegetables." "There's tools in the barn," he offered, "and seed in town if you make a list. You trust me with that already." He looked at her, really looked at her in the morning light. There was a bruise on her wrist, old and fading to yellow, probably from her late husband's last grip. But her chin was up her shoulders straight, and there was a determination in her eyes that he recognized. "We're married, aren't we?" he said. "May not be conventional, but that makes you mistress of this house. You do what you think needs doing." Something shifted in her expression, a softening that made her look younger, closer to her actual age. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for last night, for listening, for not judging. Nothing to judge. You survived, that's all that matters." She turned away quickly, but not before he caught the sheen of tears she was trying to hide. He pretended not to notice, finishing his coffee and heading out to begin the day's work. But as he walked toward the barn, he found himself looking back at the house where she stood in the doorway watching him go. She raised a hand in a small wave, and he returned it feeling something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten its name. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. It made you vulnerable, made you care about things that could be lost. But as he saddled his horse and prepared to check the herd, Caleb found himself embracing that danger. Because maybe Marcus had been right. Maybe they could save each other. Maybe two people running from the past could find a way to stop running and build something new. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and revealing the vast expanse of land that was theirs now. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing. The grass rippled like water in the wind. And somewhere behind him, a woman who'd survived hell was planting seeds for vegetables that wouldn't be ready for months, an act of faith that tomorrow would come and be worth preparing for. Caleb touched his spurs to his horse's sides and rode out to face the day, carrying with him the memory of green eyes and quiet strength of nightmares shared, and burdens that might be lighter for the sharing. He didn't know what would come next, whether Samuel Hart would find them, whether the memories would ever truly fade, whether this strange arrangement could become something more than mere survival. But for the first time in years, he found himself curious about the future rather than dreading it, and that he thought, as he rode toward the rising sun, was already more than he'd dared to hope for. The first snow came earlier than expected, 3 weeks after Evelyn's arrival, transforming the Wyoming landscape into something both beautiful and merciless. Caleb had been watching the signs, the way the cattle clustered together, the birds flying south in desperate formations, the particular quality of cold that bit deeper than autumn should allow. He'd spent days preparing, reinforcing the barn, stacking wood, until his shoulders screamed, moving the cattle closer to shelter. But nature in Wyoming didn't care about human preparations. It came when it pleased with a fury that reminded everyone who truly ruled these lands. The storm hit just after midnight, announced by a wind that sounded like the world tearing apart. Caleb woke instantly, years of survival, having trained him to recognize danger in all its forms. Through his window, he could see nothing but white snow falling so thick it erased the world beyond the glass. He rose and dressed quickly, pulling on layers of wool and leather that would keep him alive if he had to go outside. The house groaned under the wind's assault timbers, creaking like a ship in a storm. Moving through the dark hallway, he stopped at Evelyn's door, listening. Silence. She'd learned to sleep through the normal sounds of the ranch, but this was different. "Evelyn." He knocked softly, then louder, when the wind swallowed the sound. The door opened and she stood there fully dressed, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "I've been awake for an hour," she said. "This isn't just a storm, is it?" "Blizzard," he confirmed. "Could last days. We need to prepare." She nodded. No panic in her expression, just practical assessment. In the 3 weeks since her arrival, he'd learned this about her. She met challenges head-on without complaint or dramatics. The garden she'd started was already showing green shoots despite the cold. She'd reorganized his entire house with quiet efficiency, making it not just cleaner, but somehow warmer, more welcoming. And she'd never had another nightmare, at least not one that woke him. They worked together through the pre-dawn hours, bringing in extra wood, filling every available container with water before the pump froze, checking that the shutters were secure. When gray light finally penetrated the storm, revealing the extent of their situation, even Caleb felt a flutter of concern. The snow was already 3 feet deep and rising. The barn only 50 yards away was barely visible through the white wall. "The animals," Evelyn said, looking out at where the barn should be. "I'll check on them," Caleb said, already reaching for his heavy coat. "Not alone." She was putting on her own coat, a thin thing that would be useless in this weather. "You'll freeze before you get halfway there." "Then give me something warmer." There was steel in her voice, the same tone she'd used when she'd told him about her dead husband. Caleb recognized it as the sound of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. He went to his room and returned with an old military coat, thick and worn but still serviceable. "Stay close," he said, wrapping a rope around his waist and handing her the other end. "If we get separated, follow the rope back." The journey to the barn was like walking through a frozen hell. The wind hit them like a physical force, driving snow into every gap in their clothing, stealing breath before it could warm their lungs. Evelyn stayed right behind him, never complaining, though he could hear her teeth chattering even over the storm's roar. The barn was warmer, filled with the heat of animal bodies and the sweet smell of hay. The horses nickered nervously, and the milk cow lowed her displeasure, but they were safe. Caleb forked down extra hay while Evelyn checked water troughs, breaking the thin skin of ice that had already formed. "How long can they stay here without us?" she asked, having to shout over the wind that penetrated even the barn's thick walls. "Days if needed, week maybe, but we'll check on them." "In this?" She gestured toward the barn door, which was rattling like something alive trying to break in. "In this," he confirmed. "Ranch life doesn't stop for weather." The journey back to the house was worse, the wind now in their faces, snow blinding them completely. Caleb navigated by instinct and memory, one arm extended to feel for obstacles, the other making sure the rope connecting him to Evelyn stayed taut. When his hand finally hit the porch rail, he pulled her up and through the door, with relief that he was careful not to show. They stood in the mudroom, snow melting off their clothes in puddles, both breathing hard. Evelyn's face was bright red with cold ice crystals in her eyelashes, but she was smiling, actually smiling. "What?" he asked, unwrapping the frozen scarf from his neck. "I just realized," she said, pulling off the oversized coat, "that's the most alive I've felt in years. Afraid, yes, but the good kind of afraid. The kind where you're fighting something real instead of—" She trailed off. "Instead of shadows," he finished. "Yes, exactly." They hung their wet clothes and moved to the main room, where the fire still burned. Evelyn immediately began making coffee, her movements efficient despite her frozen fingers. Caleb watched her, noting how natural she looked in his kitchen, now how the space seemed to accommodate her presence as if it had been waiting. "We could be trapped for days," he said, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. "I've been trapped in worse places with worse company," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. "At least here the danger is honest. Snow doesn't pretend to love you while it's killing you." It was the most directly she'd referenced her marriage since that first night. Caleb studied her over his coffee, seeing new things in the storm's dim light, a small scar on her jawline he hadn't noticed before, the way she held herself, always ready to move, to run or fight as needed. "Tell me about the war," she said suddenly. "You never speak of it, but I see it in you. The way you check the perimeter every night, how you never sit with your back to a door, the dreams that have you reaching for your gun before you're even awake. Nothing good to tell. I'm not looking for good. I'm looking for truth. We're going to be here for days with nothing but each other's company. We can sit in silence, or we can try to actually know each other. I've told you my darkness. Maybe sharing yours would make it lighter." Caleb set down his mug, staring into the fire. He'd never told anyone about the war, not in any real way. People knew he'd served, knew he'd been at Antietam and Gettysburg. But the details, those he'd kept locked away like dangerous animals that might escape if given the chance. I was 18 when I enlisted. He began, his voice rough, young and stupid and full of ideas about glory and righteousness. My family had a small farm in Ohio, nothing special, but it was ours. I thought I'd go fight for a few months, come home a hero, marry Sarah Jenkins from the next farm over. What happened to Sarah? Married my brother while I was gone. Can't blame her. The boy who left never came home. Someone else did, wearing his face, but nothing else the same. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Inside, the fire popped and sparked the only other sound in the room. First battle was Antietam, he continued. September 17th, 1862. Bloodiest single day in American history. 23,000 casualties in 12 hours. I watched my best friend from home get cut in half by a cannonball. Just gone. One moment he was laughing about something, can't even remember what, and the next he was in pieces. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just listened, her green eyes steady on his face. After that, it was just survival. You learn not to make friends because friends died. You learn to kill without thinking because thinking got you killed. By Gettysburg, I was good at it, too good. They made me a sergeant, then a lieutenant, gave me medals for doing things that haunt me still. What things? There was a house. He said the words coming harder now. Confederate sharpshooters had taken it, were picking off our men one by one. I was ordered to clear it, took 6 men with me. We went in at night, knives and bayonets, silent as death. The Confederates were just boys, some younger than I was. We killed them all. Had to. But one... He stopped, swallowing hard. One was crying for his mother when I found him. Gut shot from our advance, dying slow. Couldn't have been more than 16. He begged me to write to her, tell her he was brave. I did what I thought was mercy, ended it quick. But I still see his face, still hear him asking for his mother. The storm seemed to pause, as if nature itself was listening. Then it returned with doubled force, shaking the house like a reminder that the world didn't stop for human grief. After the war, I couldn't go home, Caleb continued. The farm felt too small, too quiet. I kept expecting attacks, kept seeing threats in every shadow. Nearly shot the pastor when he came calling one evening. That's when I knew I had to leave. So you came west, became a bounty hunter. Figured if I was only good at killing, might as well get paid for it and maybe take some bad men out of the world. For 5 years, that's all I did. Track, hunt, kill, or capture. Made a reputation, made money. Lost more pieces of my soul with every job. What made you stop? The Morrison gang, he said. You probably heard about it. 6 men who'd been terrorizing the territory, robbing, killing, worse things to women. I tracked them for 3 months, finally cornered them in a box canyon. Should have waited for backup, but I was tired. Tired of the hunt, tired of the death, just tired. He stood pacing to the window where nothing was visible but white fury. I gave them a chance to surrender. They laughed. So I killed them all. 6 men in less than 2 minutes. The last one, the youngest Morrison boy, couldn't have been 20. He threw down his gun, hands up, crying, and for a moment I saw that Confederate boy again asking for his mother. But my finger was already squeezing the trigger, muscle memory, instinct. He died surprised. You did what you had to do, Evelyn said softly. Did I do what I'd become programmed to do? After that, I couldn't anymore. Used the bounty money to buy this land as far from people as I could get. Built this place with my own hands, trying to create instead of destroy. But you can't build over a foundation of blood. It always seeps through. Evelyn rose and moved to stand beside him at the window. She didn't touch him, but her presence was warm, solid, real. We're all building on bloody foundations, she said. The difference is whether we let it poison what we grow or use it to understand how precious peace really is. They stood together watching the storm, 2 damaged souls finding shelter, not just from the weather, but from their own histories. The silence between them was different now, not empty, but full of shared understanding. The first day passed slowly. They fell into a routine, checking the animals every few hours, keeping the fire fed, preparing simple meals from their supplies. Evelyn had been teaching herself to bake bread, and the smell of it filled the house warm and comforting. Caleb found himself talking more than he had in years, drawn out by her quiet questions and genuine interest. She told him about her childhood in Virginia before the war changed everything. Her father had been a school teacher, her mother a seamstress. They'd valued education, art, beauty, all things that seemed frivolous now, but that she still carried with her like treasures. I still have my mother's poetry book, she said, producing a small, worn volume from her room. It's the only thing of theirs I kept. She read to him that evening while the storm raged, her voice soft but clear, bringing words of beauty into their fortress against the white chaos outside. Caleb had never been one for poetry, but hearing it in her voice, seeing how it transformed her face into something almost peaceful, he began to understand its power. The second night, the nightmares came for both of them. Caleb woke to his own strangled cry, gun in hand, before consciousness fully returned. He was pointing it at shadows, at memories of men long dead, his finger on the trigger and only muscle control preventing disaster. He forced his breathing to slow, forced his hand to lower the weapon, forced himself back to the present. Wyoming, the ranch, the storm's safety. Then he heard its soft crying from the next room. Not the terrified screams of that first night, but something worse, hopeless, exhausted sobbing that spoke of someone who'd given up fighting the dreams. He knocked on her door. "Evelyn." "Go away," came the muffled response. "No." He entered to find her curled into a ball on the bed, face buried in the pillow, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. This time he didn't maintain distance. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Was it him?" he asked. She nodded, without looking up. "It's always him. Even dead, he won't leave me alone. In the dream, he was laughing. Said I could run to the ends of the earth, but I'd always belonged to him, that he'd marked me in ways that would never heal." "He lied. Did he?" She sat up suddenly, face streaked with tears, eyes wild. "Look at me, Caleb. I'm 23 years old, and I'm terrified of my own shadow. I can't stand to be touched, can't trust kindness, can't even sleep without him finding me. What kind of life is that? What kind of wife does that make me?" "You're not my wife," he said bluntly. "We both know what this is, two broken people trying to survive. But that doesn't mean he was right. You're here, aren't you? You left. You started over. That takes more courage than anything I did in the war. I'm not brave. I'm just too much of a coward to die." "Same thing sometimes." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and he could see her cataloging his own damage, the way his hand still rested on his gun, the tension in his shoulders, the eyes that had seen too much. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she said with a laugh that was half sob. "The killer and the victim playing house while a blizzard tries to bury us." "We're survivors," he corrected, "and this storm will end like they all do. The question is what we do when it does." "What do you mean?" "I mean Samuel Hart. You think he's still looking?" The change in her was instant, face paling, body tensing. The fear returning full force. "He swore he would. The Hart family doesn't forgive debts, and in his mind I'm a debt owed. Then we deal with it." "You don't understand." "I understand men like him perfectly," Caleb interrupted. "They're bullies who've never faced real opposition. They prey on the weak because they are weak. If he comes here, he'll find neither weakness nor welcome." "You'd kill for me. You don't even know me." "I know enough. And I've killed for worse reasons than protecting someone who deserves protection." She reached out, then her hand almost touching his, before she pulled back the gesture, incomplete but meaningful. "I should tell you the truth," she whispered, "about Thomas's death. I don't need to know. But you should, if you're going to risk—" She stopped, took a breath, started again. "It wasn't an accident, not exactly. He was cleaning his gun, that part was true. He was drunk, which was also true. But he was pointing it at me when it went off. Said he was going to kill me then himself, that if he couldn't have me perfect, he'd rather we both be dead." "What happened?" "I rushed him, tried to get the gun away. We fought. It went off. The bullet took him in the chest. He lived for almost an hour cursing me the whole time, saying I'd murdered him, that I'd hang for it. But when the sheriff came, he saw the bruises on my throat, the black eye, the broken ribs. He wrote it down as an accident and told me to leave town as soon as I could walk." "Good sheriff." Samuel didn't think so. "He accused me of seducing the sheriff, of being a witch of murder. Said he'd see justice done himself since the law wouldn't. That's when I ran. The wind chose that moment to slam something against the house, a branch maybe, or debris picked up from God knows where. They both jumped, then laughed at their own skittishness. "We should try to sleepwig," Caleb said, standing. "I can't, not after. Would you stay? Just sit in the chair? I know it's improper, but propriety went out the window when we got married for convenience," he said, pulling the chair closer to the bed. "Sleep. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too." "I've gone longer without it. Sleep, Evelyn." She curled up under the quilts, looking smaller and younger than her years. But before she closed her eyes, she said, "Thank you for not judging, for understanding, for being here." "Same to you," he replied, meaning it. She slept fitfully, whimpering occasionally, but didn't wake. Caleb sat in the uncomfortable chair watching her, and the window alternately standing guard against threats both real and remembered. The storm continued its assault on the house, but inside in this small room there was a different kind of peace, the peace of shared burdens, of mutual understanding, of not being alone with the demons. The third day brought a brief respite. The snow still fell, but the wind died down, allowing them to venture out further. The barn was holding up well, though the animals were restless. One of the horses, a mare named Duchess, was showing signs of colic, probably from the stress. Evelyn helped him walk her, showing a natural way with animals that surprised him. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father kept horses. Before the war, before everything went bad. I loved them. Thomas sold them all, of course, said animals were a waste of resources. Thomas was a fool. Among other things, they worked together comfortably now, anticipating each other's movements, communicating without words. It was Caleb who realized the kind of partnership he'd seen in other couples, but never experienced himself. Not romantic necessarily, but something perhaps more valuable: trust. That evening, with the mare stable and the storm picking up again, they sat by the fire playing cards with a worn deck Evelyn had found in a drawer. "You're cheating," she accused, but she was smiling. "Proving it's the hard part," he replied, laying down a winning hand. "Where did a respectable rancher learn to cheat at cards?" "Same place he learned to shoot track and survive on hardtack and spite. The war teaches many skills, not all of them honorable. Show me." "What?" "Show me how to cheat. Might come in handy someday." So he did, teaching her how to palm cards, how to deal from the bottom, how to read the tiny marks that experienced players put on cards. She was a quick study, clever fingers and sharp eyes, picking up the tricks easily. "You'd have made a good criminal," he said admiringly after she successfully cheated him 3 hands in a row. "Who says I'm not married under false pretenses, possibly murdered my first husband learning to cheat at cards? I'm building quite the resume." They were laughing, actually laughing, when the sound came. Not the storm, something else. Caleb was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, moving to the window. There it was again, a voice calling out, barely audible over the wind. "Someone's out there," Evelyn breathed, joining him at the window. Through the swirling snow they could just make out a shape, a horse and rider, or what was left of them. The horse was staggering, the rider slumped over both, clearly at the end of their strength. "Could be a trap," Caleb said, even as he was reaching for his coat. "Could be someone dying," Evelyn countered, already wrapping herself in the military coat. They went out together, Caleb leading with his gun drawn, Evelyn right behind with a lantern. The rider had fallen from the horse by the time they reached him, lying in the snow like a discarded doll. Young Caleb saw maybe 17, half-frozen lips blue but breathing. "Help me," the boy gasped. "Please, my family. Wagon stuck, mother and sisters." "Where?" Caleb demanded. "Mile back, maybe 2. Please." Caleb looked at Evelyn. To go out in this storm searching for a wagon was borderline suicidal. But to leave a family to freeze. "Get him inside," he said. "Warm him up. I'll take the horses and—" "We'll take the horses," she corrected. "You'll need help if there's a wagon to dig out." "Evelyn." "We don't have time to argue. Every minute matters." She was right. Caleb harnessed 2 of his strongest horses to a makeshift sled, while Evelyn gathered blankets, rope, anything that might help. The boy had passed out but was breathing steadily, warming by the fire. The journey into the storm was nightmarish. Even with the lanterns, they could barely see 10 feet ahead. Caleb navigated by instinct, following what he hoped was the road, stopping every few minutes to call out. It was Evelyn who heard the response, weak, desperate crying. The wagon was off the road, tilted into a drift already half buried. Inside, a woman and two young girls huddled together, all showing signs of severe cold exposure. The woman was barely conscious, the girls crying weakly. "We're here to help," Evelyn said, climbing into the wagon while Caleb worked on freeing it. "You're safe now." It took everything they had to get the family onto the sled wrapped in blankets secured for the journey back. The woman kept mumbling about her husband, about him going for help, about needing to wait. "Your son made it to us," Evelyn assured her. "He's safe. We need to go now." The journey back was even worse, the horses struggling with the extra weight, the wind seeming determined to drive them off course. But Caleb's knowledge of his land, built from countless nights riding the perimeter, guided them home. The next hours were a blur of activity, warming the frozen family slowly, carefully, knowing that too much heat too fast could be as deadly as the cold. The woman, Mrs. Patterson, they learned, had frostbite on her fingers. The girls aged 8 and 10 were in better shape youth, and their mother's sacrifice having protected them. The son Daniel woke delirious but coherent enough to thank them repeatedly. "We were going to my brother's place in Colorado," Mrs. Patterson explained once she could speak clearly. "My husband died last month, consumption. We had nothing left in Nebraska, and my brother said he could help. But the storm—" "You're welcome here until it passes and you're strong enough to travel," Evelyn said, her tone brooking no argument. Caleb watched her take charge, organizing sleeping arrangements, finding clothes that might fit the girls, preparing food for when they could eat. She moved with purpose, with the kind of efficiency that spoke of someone used to managing crisis. But more than that, she glowed with something he hadn't seen before, genuine happiness at being able to help. The house, which had felt full with just 2 people, now burst with life. The girls, Lucy and Margaret, were shy at first, but soon warmed to Evelyn's gentle manner. She found paper and charcoal, teaching them to draw, telling them stories, creating a sense of normalcy in the midst of chaos. "She's good with them," Mrs. Patterson said to Caleb as they watched Evelyn braid Lucy's hair. "She is," he agreed. "How long have you been married?" "Not long." "But long enough," the woman said with a knowing smile. "I see how you watch her, how she looks for you whenever you leave the room. That's love, whether you call it that or not." Caleb didn't correct her. Couldn't, maybe. Because watching Evelyn with those children, seeing her laugh genuinely for the first time, something was shifting in his chest. Not love, perhaps, but possibility. The storm lasted 2 more days. 2 days of close quarters, of sharing meals and stories, of the girls' laughter brightening the house. Daniel recovered quickly, youth and rest working their magic. He helped Caleb with the animals, eager to repay their kindness, full of questions about ranching and the West. "You remind me of myself at your age," Caleb told him. "All dreams and determination." "Did your dreams come true?" the boy asked. Caleb looked through the window to where Evelyn was teaching the girls to make bread flour in her hair, smiling as Margaret told an animated story. "Still deciding," he said. The morning the storm broke dawned crystal clear, the sun painful on the fresh snow. The world had been remade pure and white and deceptively peaceful. The road would be impassable for days, maybe weeks, but the danger had passed. Mrs. Patterson's brother arrived a week later, having heard about the storm and come searching. He was a prosperous-looking man with a good team and a sturdy wagon, grateful beyond words for the rescue of his family. "I owe you everything," he said, trying to press money into Caleb's hand. "You owe us nothing," Caleb replied. "Out here we help each other. It's how we survive." The goodbye was harder than expected. The girls cried, clinging to Evelyn. She held them tight, whispering promises to write, to visit, if ever possible. When the wagon pulled away, she stood on the porch watching until it disappeared, tears streaming down her face. "You all right?" Caleb asked, joining her. "They reminded me of what I wanted," she said softly. "Children, a family. Things I thought Thomas had killed in me along with everything else. It's not too late." She looked at him then with those green eyes that held such depth. "Isn't it? I'm a ruined woman married to a damaged man in a business arrangement. What kind of family is that?" "The kind that saved 5 lives in a blizzard," he said. "The kind that turns a house into a home. The kind that maybe isn't as much of a business arrangement as we pretend." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the bread flour still in her hair, see the hope warring with fear in her expression. Caleb, The moment shattered as a horse appeared on the horizon, riding hard toward the ranch. Caleb moved instinctively, putting himself between Evelyn and the potential threat hand on his gun. But as the rider drew closer, he recognized him, Tom Sanders from town, who sometimes brought mail and news. "Mr. Boone," Tom called, pulling up his lathered horse. "Got news you need to hear. Man came through town yesterday asking questions. City man, Eastern accent, throwing money around. Looking for a woman named Evelyn Hart. Says she's his sister-in-law, that there's been a family emergency." Evelyn's hand found Caleb's arm, gripping tight enough to hurt. "What did people tell him?" Caleb asked, voice steady. "Nothing far as I know. But Mr. Boone, he had 3 other men with him, hard-looking men, and he said he'd pay well for information, real well. Thought you should know." "Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the warning." Tom tipped his hat and rode off, clearly not wanting to be involved in whatever was coming. Caleb turned to Evelyn, whose face had gone pale as the snow around them. "He found me," she whispered. "Samuel found me." "No," Caleb corrected, his voice hard as iron. "He found us, and that's going to be his last mistake." The waiting was the worst part. 3 days had passed since Tom Sanders brought his warning. 3 days of watching the horizon, of jumping at every sound, of seeing threat in every dust cloud. Caleb had spent the time preparing, cleaning, and loading every weapon he owned, reinforcing the shutters, teaching Evelyn to shoot with something approaching accuracy. She was a quick learner when fear motivated her, though her hand shook every time she held the rifle. "Squeeze, don't pull," he instructed for the 10th time, adjusting her stance. "And breathe. Fear makes you hold your breath, and that makes you miss." "How do you stay so calm?" she asked, lowering the rifle after hitting the target dead center for the first time. "Knowing he's coming. Because I've been waiting for violence my whole life," Caleb replied, taking the rifle from her. "At least this time I know why it's coming and what I'm fighting for." She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see through all his carefully constructed walls. In the weeks since the blizzard, something had fundamentally shifted between them. They still maintained separate rooms, still carefully avoided any physical contact beyond the necessary, but the space between them had filled with something unnamed yet undeniable. He caught her watching him sometimes with an expression he couldn't read, and he knew she caught him doing the same. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I could leave. Lead him away from here." "You could try," he agreed, "and I'd follow you. And we'd have this same conversation somewhere else, probably with less advantageous ground. This isn't your fight. Became mine the day you stepped off that stagecoach." He turned to face her fully. "Maybe before that. Maybe it became mine the day Marcus wrote that first letter telling me about a woman who needed a chance." "I'm not good at much, Evelyn, but I'm very good at fighting. Let me be good at this." Before she could respond, dust appeared on the horizon. Not a dust cloud from wind, but the deliberate kind kicked up by horses. Multiple horses moving with purpose. "Get inside," Caleb ordered, his entire demeanor changing, becoming the predator he'd tried so hard to leave behind. "Remember what we discussed. Kitchen window has the best angle. Don't shoot unless you have to, but if you have to, don't hesitate." She ran for the house while Caleb took position on the porch rifle across his lap, pistol loose in its holster. He looked like a man taking his ease in the afternoon sun, but every muscle was coiled, ready to explode into violence at the first provocation. 4 riders approached, spreading out in a semicircle as they neared the ranch. 3 were hired guns. Caleb could tell immediately the way they sat their horses, the way their hands never strayed far from their weapons, the dead eyes that had seen and dealt too much death. But the 4th, the one who rode slightly ahead, that had to be Samuel Hart. He was everything his brother hadn't been, according to Evelyn's descriptions. Where Thomas had been small and mean, Samuel was tall and broad, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who'd never been seriously challenged. Handsome in a cruel way, with dark hair slicked back and clothes that screamed Eastern money. But his eyes gave him away pale blue and cold as winter sky, with the flat effect of a man who enjoyed others' pain. "Good afternoon," Samuel called out, stopping his horse just outside comfortable shooting range. Smart, but not smart enough. "I'm looking for Mrs. Evelyn Hart. I was told she might be here. No one here by that name, Caleb replied, not moving from his relaxed position. You've been misinformed. Samuel smiled, an expression that didn't reach those cold eyes. Perhaps she's going by another name now. Boone, isn't it, Mrs. Caleb Boone? How convenient marrying so quickly after my brother's tragic death. Man's got a right to marry who he chooses, woman too. Not when she belongs to someone else. The smile disappeared. Evelyn is my brother's widow. By rights and by law, she's under my protection. Funny definition of protection requiring 3 armed men. These are dangerous territories. A man can't be too careful. Samuel dismounted slowly, his men tensing. Mr. Boone, I'm not an unreasonable man. I understand Evelyn may have told you stories painted me as some sort of villain. Women can be hysterical, especially after trauma, but I assure you I only want what's best for her. And what would that be? Coming home with me where she belongs. There are debts to be settled, my brother's estate certain, obligations she left unfulfilled. Surely a man of your reputation understands the importance of settling debts. Caleb stood slowly, the rifle still casual in his hands, but pointed in Samuel's general direction. I understand a lot of things. I understand that bruises fade, but the fear remains. I understand that some men see women as property to be owned rather than people to be cherished. And I understand that you're standing on my land making threats against my wife, and that's a very dangerous place to be. One of the hired guns, a scarred man with Mexican spurs, shifted in his saddle. Want us to take him, Mr. Hart? Now, Rodriguez, let's not be hasty, Samuel said, but his eyes never left Caleb's face. Mr. Boone is a reasonable man, a businessman. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. I'm prepared to offer compensation for your trouble. Say $500. That's more than fair for a few weeks of room and board. Not for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Boone. It's just a matter of price. $1,000. Think what that could do for your ranch. I said she's not for sale. Samuel's facade cracked slightly, showing the ugliness beneath. She's a murderer, you know. Killed my brother in cold blood. I have witnesses who'll swear to it. One word from me and the law will come calling. You want to hang beside her. Your brother died cleaning his gun while drunk, Caleb said calmly. Sheriff ruled it an accident, case closed. And even if it wasn't, even if she'd shot him dead in his sleep, I'd still stand between you and her, because I've seen what men like you do to women like her, and I've had my fill of it. Men like me. Samuel stepped closer, his hand drifting toward the pearl-handled pistol at his hip. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Know you're the kind of man who brings 3 guns to collect 1 woman. Know you're used to getting your way through money or force. Know you look at her and see property instead of person. Caleb's voice dropped, becoming something dangerous. And I know you're going to get back on that horse and ride away and never come back. Or what? You'll shoot me, murder me in cold blood. That's what you do, isn't it? The great Caleb Boone, killer of men. How many notches on that gun, Boone? How many men have you sent to hell? 47, Caleb said quietly, and something in his tone made even the hired guns shift nervously. 47 men I've killed, and I remember every face, every name when I knew it. Some deserved it, some were just on the wrong side of a war, but all of them haunt me. You want to be number 48? Because unlike the others, I'd sleep peaceful after. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Samuel's men were ready hands on guns waiting for the word. Caleb stood alone, outnumbered 4-1, but somehow he seemed the more dangerous force. Maybe it was the absolute calm in his stance, or the way his gray eyes had gone flat and emotionless, or the reputation that preceded him like a shadow. Then Evelyn's voice cut through the tension like a blade. No. She emerged from the house head high, wearing her best dress, the one she'd been saving for town visits they never made. Her hair was properly pinned, her bearing regal, despite the fear Caleb could see in the trembling of her hands. She looked like what she'd been before Thomas Hart destroyed her, a lady of quality and grace. Evelyn, Samuel's voice changed, becoming silky seductive. There you are, my dear. I've been so worried. When you disappeared after Thomas's death, I feared the worst. You feared I'd escape, she corrected. stopping beside Caleb, but not behind him, just as I did. Escape, my dear girl, you're confused. I only wanted to care for you to fulfill my brother's wishes. Your brother's wishes? Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your brother wished to own me, control me, break me into nothing, and when he failed, you decided to finish the job. Such dramatics. You always were given to hysteria. Is that what you call it when a woman speaks truth? Hysteria? She stepped forward and Caleb tensed, ready to pull her back. I have the scars, Samuel. Would you like to see them? The ones from Thomas's belt, his fists, his boots. Or perhaps the ones from that night you came to comfort me after his funeral, when I had to jump from a second-story window to avoid your comfort. Samuel's face darkened. You're embarrassing yourself, Evelyn. Come with me now and we'll forget this unpleasantness. You can't seriously prefer this. He gestured dismissively at the ranch at Caleb. To what I'm offering. What are you offering Samuel? Another prison? Another man who sees me as something to be owned and used? She moved closer to Caleb, not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. Yes, I prefer this. I prefer 1,000 times this honest life with a man who sees me as human to your gilded cage. He's a killer. So is Thomas. The difference is Caleb kills men who deserve it. Thomas killed the spirit of a 17-year-old girl who'd never done anything but try to love him. You belong to me, Samuel snarled, the mask finally falling completely. Your heart property, and you'll return with me if I have to drag you. Try, Caleb said softly. The word hung in the air like a challenge, a dare, a promise. Rodriguez's hand twitched toward his gun, but Caleb's rifle was already moving, not quite aimed, but ready. The other two hired guns spread slightly, improving their angles, while Samuel's hand hovered over his pearl-handled pistol. You can't take us all, Boone, Samuel said. You're good, but you're not that good. He's not alone, Evelyn said, and there was steel in her voice now. She reached into the folds of her dress and produced a small derringer, the one Caleb had given her that morning. And I'm done being afraid of you. Samuel laughed, ugly and mocking. You're going to shoot me. You couldn't hurt a fly, Evelyn. You're weak, pathetic. Thomas always said, the derringer fired the sound sharp in the afternoon air. The bullet took Samuel's hat off, missing his head by inches. His hand went to his gun, but Caleb's rifle was already centered on his chest. The next one won't miss, Evelyn said, and her voice didn't shake at all. I'm not the girl Thomas married. I'm not the victim you tried to make me. I'm someone who survived you both, and I'll keep surviving. With or without bloodshed, your choice. Samuel's face had gone pale, whether from rage or fear, Caleb couldn't tell. The hired guns were frozen, waiting for orders, calculating odds. Rodriguez, the smart one, was already backing his horse up slightly. This isn't over, Samuel said finally. I have lawyers' connections. That ranch, this marriage, I'll challenge it all. You'll be left with nothing. I started with nothing, Evelyn replied. Nothing but fear and pain and shame. Now I have a home, a partner, a life. That's everything, Samuel. And you can't take it because you didn't give it. We're leaving, Samuel announced to his men, mounting his horse with stiff movements. But this isn't finished. You've made a powerful enemy today, both of you. Add him to the list, Caleb said. And Samuel, if I see you or your men on my property again, I won't wait for you to draw. I'll put you down like the rabid dog you are. That's not a threat. It's a promise, and I always keep my promises. Samuel wheeled his horse around, his men following. But before they disappeared, Rodriguez looked back and touched his hat brim to Caleb, professional, acknowledging professional. Then they were gone, dust settling in their wake. Evelyn stood rigid until they vanished over the horizon, then collapsed. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her easily and carrying her inside. She was conscious but shaking violently, the derringer falling from nerveless fingers. I shot at him, she gasped. I actually shot at him. You did well, Caleb said, setting her gently in the chair by the fire. Took courage to face him like that. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. He'll be back, won't he? Men like him don't give up. Probably, Caleb admitted, kneeling beside her chair. But we'll be ready. And Evelyn, you're not alone in this, not anymore. She reached out hesitant and touched his face, Her fingers were cold against his cheek, trembling but gentle. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" He captured her hand in his, holding it carefully like something precious and fragile. Because somewhere between that first nightmare and teaching you to shoot, between the blizzard and watching you with those children, you became more than a business arrangement. You became, he struggled for words, this man more comfortable with violence than emotion. You became mine to protect, mine to care for. Mine. Yours, she repeated softly. I've been owned before Caleb. I can't be that again. Not owned, he corrected. Never owned, but mine nonetheless, like this ranch is mine, like my life is mine. Part of me, part of what makes me whole, instead of just surviving. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Then you're mine too, she whispered. Mine to protect, mine to heal, mine to show that there's more to you than death. They stayed that way for a long moment, sharing breath and warmth, and something that might have been the beginning of love. Then Caleb pulled back, standing and moving to the window to watch for threats that might return. We should prepare, he said, voice rough. Samuel won't let this go. He'll come back with more men, or the law, or both. Then we'll face it, Evelyn said, standing and smoothing her dress with hands that barely shook. Together. The next days were tense but productive. Caleb rode to town, sending telegrams to Marcus and others who might help, laying legal groundwork for what was coming. The marriage was legitimate, filed properly, witnessed. The ranch was in his name, clear, no liens or disputes. But Samuel Hart had money and influence, and both could twist the law in dangerous ways. Evelyn, meanwhile, transformed the house into something more fortress-like. She helped Caleb board up windows, create defensive positions, stock ammunition where it could be quickly accessed. But she also continued the normal routines, cooking, cleaning, tending her garden that was finally showing real growth. It was her way of fighting back, refusing to let fear rule her life. A week passed without incident. Then another. The waiting grew harder, nerves fraying with each passing day. They took turns keeping watch at night, started at every approaching rider, kept weapons always within reach. It was Evelyn who suggested they go to town. We can't hide forever, she said over breakfast. And I need supplies. The garden needs proper tools if it's going to survive, and we're low on flour and coffee. It's dangerous. Samuel could have men watching. Then they'll see I'm not afraid. That we're not afraid. She met his eyes steadily. I spent 6 years hiding Caleb. I won't do it anymore. If we're going to build a life here, it has to be a real life, not just survival. So they went, Caleb driving the wagon, while Evelyn sat beside him, both armed, both watchful. The town was small, just a main street with essential businesses, a saloon, a church that doubled as a school. People stared as they drove in whispers, following in their wake. Everyone knew about the confrontation at the ranch, how Caleb Boone had faced down 4 men for his new bride. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor's wife, was cold, at first clearly unsure about this woman who'd brought trouble to their quiet town. But Evelyn was gracious, polite, asking after Mrs. Henderson's children. She'd heard about complimenting the woman's organization of the store. Slowly, the ice thawed. That Samuel Hart was here again yesterday, Mrs. Henderson said quietly as she measured out flour. Asking more questions, making more threats. Sheriff ran him off, but still... I'm sorry for the troubles, Evelyn said. We never meant to bring problems to your town. Honey men like that bring their own problems wherever they go, the older woman replied, warming further. My Henry saw what he was right off a bully, and worse. You're better off with Mr. Boone, frightening as he might be. He's not frightening, Evelyn said softly. He's just careful. Life has taught him to be. Mrs. Henderson studied her for a moment, then nodded. Life teaches us all different lessons, doesn't it? You need anything, you let me know. Women have to stick together out here. They were loading the wagon when Sheriff Patterson approached. He was an older man, weathered and steady, with the kind of calm that came from decades of keeping the peace in lawless places. Mr. Boone. Mrs. Boone, he greeted them. Glad I caught you. Need to discuss some things. Sheriff, Caleb acknowledged, hand drifting instinctively toward his gun. No trouble from me, Patterson assured him. But that Hart fellow has been making noise about pressing charges. Says your wife murdered his brother and you're harboring a fugitive. The sheriff in Virginia ruled it an accident, Evelyn said. I know. I telegraphed him, got the whole story. As far as the law is concerned, you're clear. But Hart's got money for lawyers, and lawyers can make trouble even when there's no case. Let them come, Caleb said flatly. That's what I'm afraid of, Patterson replied. Look, I've got no quarrel with either of you. From what I've heard and seen, you're decent folks trying to make a life. But if this escalates, if shooting starts in my town, I'll have to act. You understand? We understand, Evelyn said before Caleb could respond. We don't want trouble, Sheriff. We just want to be left alone. Unfortunately, wanting and getting are often different things. Patterson tipped his hat. You folks be careful. And Boone, that reputation of yours might keep Hart cautious, but desperate men do desperate things. They drove home in thoughtful silence, both processing the sheriff's warning. As they crested the hill that brought the ranch into view, Caleb suddenly pulled the horses to a stop. What is it? Evelyn asked. Then she saw it too. Smoke. Not from the chimney, but from the barn. Black smoke, the kind that came from burning hay and wood. Stay here, Caleb ordered, jumping from the wagon. Like hell, Evelyn replied, grabbing the rifle from under the seat. They approached carefully, but whoever had set the fire was gone. The barn was fully engulfed, no saving it. Caleb ran for the animals, managing to free the horses and push them toward safety. The milk cow was already out, standing in the yard, looking confused, but the structure itself was lost along with the hay supply tools and tack stored inside. As they stood watching months of work burn, Evelyn spotted something nailed to the fence post. A note, expensive paper with elegant handwriting. This is just the beginning. She comes with me, or you lose everything. You have 3 days. S.H. Caleb crumpled the note in his fist, his face a mask of cold fury. He wants a war, he'll get one. No, Evelyn said firmly. That's what he wants you to react with violence to prove you're the savage he says you are. We need to be smarter. The barn can be rebuilt, but if you kill him or his men in revenge, you'll hang for it, and then where will I be? She touched his arm gently. We fight, but we fight smart, legal and proper, the way that frustrates men like him most. That night, as they watched the barn's embers glow in the darkness, a rider approached. Caleb was ready, rifle aimed, but the rider called out, Marcus sent me. It was a young lawyer named James Thornton from Denver, thin and nervous-looking, but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Marcus received your telegram, Thornton explained once inside. He hired me to handle any legal challenges Mr. Hart might bring. I've already filed injunctions preventing him from making any claims on Mrs. Boone or your property. You can stop him legally? Evelyn asked hopefully. I can make it very difficult for him to use the law against you, Thornton clarified. But Mr. Hart seems the type who might operate outside the law when it doesn't serve him. Already has, Caleb said, explaining about the barn. Thornton made notes, nodding. Destruction of property, criminal threats. We can file charges, though, proving he was behind it might be difficult. They talked long into the night, planning legal strategies, discussing options. Thornton was staying in town, but would return daily if needed. As he prepared to leave, he paused. Mrs. Boone, I've reviewed the documents from Virginia. Your late husband's death was clearly self-defense, even if the sheriff chose to call it an accident for simplicity. No court would convict you. But Mr. Hart is spreading a different story, claiming you seduced and murdered his brother for money. There was no money, Evelyn said bitterly. Thomas spent everything on whiskey and gambling. I left with the clothes on my back. Which we can prove. Financial records show the estate was in debt. You gained nothing from his death except freedom. Thornton gathered his papers. The law is on your side, but be careful. Men like Samuel Hart often consider themselves above the law. After he left, Caleb and Evelyn sat by the fire, both exhausted but too wired to sleep. I brought this to your door, Evelyn said quietly. Your barn, your peace, everything you built. I've destroyed it. No, Caleb said firmly. Samuel Hart destroyed it. You just survived long enough to fight back. He paused, then added, and it's our barn, our peace, our life. Whatever comes, we face it together. She looked at him for a long moment, then stood and crossed to where he sat. Without hesitation, she settled into his lap, curling against his chest like she belonged there. He froze for a moment, then slowly wrapped his arms around her, holding her carefully. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered against his neck. "Not of Samuel, not of the past, not of this. This, us, whatever we are, whatever we're becoming." She pulled back enough to look at his face. "That first night I was terrified of you, this man with death in his reputation and gentleness in his hands. Now I think I'd be terrified without you." "Evelyn," he began, but she pressed fingers to his lips. "I know what this started as, convenient survival, two damaged people using each other for shelter. But it's become more, hasn't it? At least for me." "For me too," he admitted. "Somewhere between teaching you to shoot and watching you face down Samuel, you became essential, like breathing." She kissed him, then soft and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded. It was a kiss full of promise and pain, hope and fear, two people choosing each other despite or perhaps because of their damage. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn stood. "Come to bed," she said simply, holding out her hand. "Evelyn, we don't have to—" "I know. That's why I want to. Because it's a choice, not an obligation. Because you see me as a person, not property. Because I She stopped, then continued firmly. "Because I love you, Caleb Boone. Not the convenience of you, not the protection of you, but you. The man who holds me through nightmares and teaches me to defend myself and looks at me like I'm something precious instead of broken." He stood, taking her offered hand. "You are precious. And you're not broken. You're the strongest person I know." They went to his room together, no longer maintaining the fiction of separation. What happened there was gentle and patient. Two people learning to trust their bodies after so much betrayal, finding healing in each other's touch. Later, as they lay entwined, Evelyn traced the scars on his chest. Bullet wounds, knife marks, the map of a violent life. "Do they hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore," he said, catching her hand and kissing her fingers. "Nothing hurts anymore." But even in their newfound peace, both knew the storm was coming. Samuel Hart wouldn't give up, couldn't give up. His kind of man saw backing down as death itself. The question wasn't if he'd return, but when and how. The answer came at dawn 2 days later. Caleb woke to the sound of horses, many horses. He was dressed and armed in seconds, Evelyn right behind him. Through the window, they could see them, a dozen men, maybe more, spreading out to surround the house. Samuel Hart sat his horse in the center, but this time he'd brought more than hired guns. Sheriff Patterson was there, looking deeply uncomfortable, and a man in a suit who had to be some kind of legal authority. "Caleb Boone," Samuel called out. "I have a warrant for Evelyn Hart's arrest on charges of murder. Send her out or we're coming in." "That's not possible," James Thornton's voice came from behind them. The lawyer had arrived just minutes before, having ridden hard from town after hearing about the warrant. "I've already filed to have that warrant dismissed as fraudulent." "Doesn't matter," Caleb said grimly. "They're not here for legal niceties." He looked at Evelyn. "Back door, take Duchess and ride for town for anywhere." "No," she said firmly. "We face this together. Remember, this is different. There's too many." "Then we'd better be smart about it." She was already moving, not for the back door, but for the window, rifle in hand. "Mr. Thornton, can you stall them?" "I can try." The lawyer went out, the front door papers in hand, immediately engaging the suited man in legal arguments. It bought time, but not much. Samuel was getting impatient, his men restless. "You've got 1 minute, Boone," Samuel shouted. "Then we're coming in shooting." "You fire on this house, you're committing murder," Caleb called back. "Sheriff, you going to let that happen?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "No one wants shooting, Boone. Just send the woman out, let the law sort it." "The law?" Caleb laughed bitterly. "The law that Samuel Hart bought, the warrant he paid for. That law. 30 seconds. Evelyn moved to stand beside Caleb at the door. "Together," she said simply. He nodded, understanding. They stepped out onto the porch, both armed, facing the assembled men without flinching. "I'm not going with you, Samuel," Evelyn announced, her voice carrying clear and strong. "You'll have to kill us both, and everyone here will witness it. Is that what you want, to murder a woman in cold blood because she wouldn't submit to you? You're a fugitive. I'm a survivor, she interrupted. And everyone knows it. Everyone knows what Thomas was, what you are. You can kill us, but you can't kill the truth. There was movement among the hired guns' uncertainty. This wasn't what they'd signed up for, a straight murder of a woman and her husband. Even mercenaries had limits. Rodriguez, the scarred gunman from the first confrontation, suddenly spoke up. This ain't right, Mr. Hart. You said she was a murderer, but this looks like something else entirely. You're paid to shoot, not think, Samuel snarled. I'm paid to enforce the law. Sheriff Patterson said, his voice gaining strength. And right now I'm not seeing law. I'm seeing a personal vendetta. He turned his horse. I'm done here, Hart. This warrant's suspicious, and I won't be part of whatever this really is. The sheriff's departure created a domino effect. The suited man backed away suddenly, remembering urgent business elsewhere. Several of the hired guns followed, not wanting to be part of what was looking more like murder than justice. But Samuel and 5 men remained the true believers, or those too well paid to care about right and wrong. Fine, Samuel said, his cultured voice cracking to reveal the madness beneath. We'll do this the old way. Boone, you and me. Winner takes the woman. I'm not a prize to be won, Evelyn said, but Caleb was already moving, stepping down from the porch. Terms? He asked. Pistols, first blood, or death, whatever comes. Samuel dismounted, checking his pearl-handled gun. Unless you're the coward I think you are. Caleb, no, Evelyn pleaded. You don't have to prove anything. Yes, I do, he said quietly. This ends today one way or another. The 2 men faced each other in the dusty yard 20 paces apart, as the morning sun climbed higher into the Wyoming sky. Caleb stood relaxed, his hand loose at his side, the very picture of deadly calm. Samuel Hart, despite his bravado, showed signs of nervousness, a slight tremor in his gun hand, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. On 3, Rodriguez said, having appointed himself referee. The scarred gunmen seemed to have developed a grudging respect for this situation, for the old ways of settling disputes. 1, Evelyn watched from the porch, her rifle trained on Samuel's remaining men. If they moved to interfere, she would act. The weight of the weapon was familiar now, comforting even. How much she'd changed in these weeks, from a terrified woman jumping at shadows to someone ready to kill to protect what was hers. 2, Caleb's mind went quiet, the familiar pre-violence calm settling over him like an old coat. He'd done this dance so many times before, but never with so much at stake. This wasn't about survival or money or reputation. This was about the woman on the porch, about the life they were building, about the future he'd never dared imagine until now. 3, Samuel's hand moved first faster than expected, the pearl-handled pistol clearing leather with practiced smoothness. But Caleb was already in motion, his body acting on pure instinct, honed by countless life-or-death moments. His gun came up in a fluid arc. No wasted movement, no hesitation. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously, the sounds overlapping into one thunderous crack that echoed across the prairie. For a moment, both men stood, frozen, guns extended, smoke drifting from the barrels. Then Samuel Hart looked down at his chest, where a red stain was spreading across his expensive white shirt. His gun fell from nerveless fingers as he dropped to his knees, confusion replacing arrogance on his face. You actually—" he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. Caleb lowered his gun, a line of red across his left shoulder where Samuel's bullet had grazed him. You gave me no choice, he said quietly. It could have ended differently. Samuel fell forward into the dust, his body twitching once, twice, then going still. The morning seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Rodriguez was the first to move, walking over to check Samuel's body. He's dead, he announced unnecessarily. Then to Caleb's surprise, he added, fair fight. Everyone saw it. Hart drew first. The other hired guns were already mounting their horses, apparently deciding their employment had ended with their employer. One of them called out, We got no quarrel with you, Boone. We'll tell it straight if anyone asks. As they rode away, Evelyn flew down from the porch, catching Caleb as his legs suddenly gave out. The graze was minor, but the accumulated stress of the confrontation, the release of weeks of tension, hit him all at once. You're hurt, she said, examining the wound with gentle fingers. Had worse shaving, he replied, but he didn't pull away from her touch. James Thornton approached cautiously, his face pale but determined. I'll need to report this to the authorities properly. But with witnesses confirming Mr. Hart drew first, and given his history of harassment and property destruction, no charges should be filed. What about his families? Evelyn asked. There might be others. Samuel Hart had no close family beyond his brother, Thornton said. I did my research. Some distant cousins in Philadelphia who'll inherit his holdings, but they've never been west of the Mississippi and won't care about his personal vendettas. As if to confirm the ending of the threat, Rodriguez returned leading Samuel's horse, the saddlebags heavy with what turned out to be gold coins and paper money. This was meant for us, the gunman said, handing the bags to Caleb. Payment for killing you both and burning the ranch. Seems only fair it goes to you now. Blood money, Caleb said, distaste clear in his voice. Rebuilding money, Rodriguez corrected. For your barn. Man needs a barn. He mounted his own horse, then paused. You're fast, Boone. Maybe the fastest I've seen, but more than that, you're righteous. Not many of those left. He touched his hat brim to Evelyn. Ma'am, you chose well. After he rode away, they were left alone with the lawyer and the body in their yard. The sun was fully up now, warming the air, bringing with it the buzz of insects and the distant lowing of cattle. Life continuing despite death as it always did. We should bury him, Evelyn said quietly. Whatever he was, he deserves that much. So they did. Caleb digging the grave despite his wounded shoulder, Thornton helping, while Evelyn fashioned a simple wooden cross. No words were said over the grave. What was there to say? Samuel Hart had lived by violence and died by it, leaving nothing behind but gold meant for murder and the bitter taste of waste. That night, after Thornton had returned to town with his reports and statements, Caleb and Evelyn sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. His shoulder was properly bandaged, now the wound cleaned and already beginning to heal. It's over, Evelyn said, though it sounded like a question. That part is, Caleb agreed. Samuel's dead, the legal threats will die with him, and we have enough gold to rebuild twice over. But he turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who'd survived so much and come out stronger. But now we have to figure out what comes next. We got married for protection for survival. That need is gone now. You're free, Evelyn, truly free. You could go anywhere, be anyone. She was quiet for a long moment, then stood and walked to the porch rail, looking out over the land that stretched endlessly in the moonlight. Do you remember what I said the night we first made love? Every word. I meant it. I love you, Caleb Boone. Not for your protection or your ranch or your reputation. I love the man who taught me to shoot but hoped I'd never have to. The man who held me through nightmares and shared his own. The man who just risked his life not to own me, but to free me. She turned back to him, and in the moonlight she looked ethereal, like something from the poetry she loved to read. So the question isn't whether I'll stay, she continued. The question is whether you want me to. Not as a business arrangement or a convenience, but as a wife. A real wife. A partner in everything. Caleb stood, crossing to her in 2 strides. His hands framed her face gentle despite their history of violence. I've wanted that since the morning you made breakfast and hummed while you cooked. Maybe since that first night when you asked if the nightmares ever stop. I just didn't know how to say it. How to be what you deserve. I don't need you to be anything but yourself, she said. The good and the bad, the violence and the gentleness, all of it. That's who I fell in love with. He kissed her, then deep and sure, a promise and a claim all at once. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, but there was peace in it too, a settling of something that had been in motion since she stepped off that stagecoach. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. With Samuel's gold, they hired men from town to help rebuild the barn bigger and better than before. Evelyn's garden flourished in the late summer heat, promising vegetables for canning and preserving. The ranch itself prospered, the cattle healthy, the horses breeding well. But change came in unexpected ways too. It started with a fever. Caleb had been working in the sun all day helping to raise the barn's frame when dizziness struck. He attributed it to heat and exhaustion, but by evening he was burning up delirious, calling out names of men long dead. Evelyn tended him with desperate efficiency, using every remedy she knew, but the fever raged for days. Dr. Morrison from town came looking grave, talking about infection, about blood poisoning from an old wound gone bad, not the shoulder graze, but something older, deeper. There's a piece of metal in his back, the doctor explained. Shrapnel maybe, or a bullet fragment. It's been there years by the look of the scarring, but something's disturbed it. His body's fighting it now like a new invasion. Can you remove it? Not without killing him. It's too close to the spine, too deep. We can only hope his body fights it off. For 7 days and nights, Evelyn barely left his side. She bathed his burning skin with cool water, forced medicine between his cracked lips, held him when convulsions shook his body. And she talked to him constantly, unceasingly, anchoring him to life with her voice. She told him about her childhood, about the books she'd loved, about dreams she'd had before Thomas destroyed them. She told him about the future she imagined for them children. Maybe if they were blessed, a bigger house, a life of peace and purpose. She told him she loved him over and over as if the words themselves were medicine. On the 7th night, when his breathing became so shallow, she could barely detect it. She broke down completely. "Don't you dare leave me," she sobbed, clutching his hand. "Don't you dare fight for me against Samuel Hart just to give up now. I need you, Caleb. I can't do this alone. I won't survive losing you, not now, not after everything." Whether it was her words or his own stubborn will or simple luck, the fever broke near dawn. Caleb's eyes opened clear for the first time in days, focusing on her tear-stained face. "Evelyn?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," she assured him, crying harder now with relief. "I'm here, my love. Did I miss anything important?" She laughed through her tears. "Just me realizing I can't live without you, you impossible man." Recovery was slow. The metal fragment had shifted during his illness, settling into a less dangerous position, but it left him weakened for weeks. For a man used to constant action, the enforced rest was torture. But Evelyn was there reading to him, talking with him, slowly rehabilitating not just his body, but parts of his soul he'd thought dead. It was during this time that she discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. Dr. Morrison confirmed it during one of his visits to check on Caleb. "About 2 months along, I'd say," the doctor announced. "Everything looks healthy, Mrs. Boone. Congratulations." Caleb's reaction was not what she expected. Instead of joy, his face went pale, fear flickering in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked after the doctor left. "I don't know how to be a father," he said quietly. "I know how to kill, how to survive, how to work land. But a child, what if I'm like my father? Cold, distant, harsh. What if the violence in me touches them?" Evelyn sat on the bed beside him, taking his hand. "You're already a protector, Caleb. You protected me when I was a stranger. You'll protect our child even more fiercely. And the gentleness I see when you think no one's looking, that's what our child will know. But the things I've done made you who you are. A man who knows the cost of violence and chooses peace whenever possible. A man who understands pain and offers comfort. That's the father our child needs." He pulled her close, resting his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child?" he repeated, wonder creeping into his voice. "We're having a child. We are. In this hard place, this violent world, in this home we're building, this life we're choosing," she corrected. "Yes, the world is hard, but we're harder. We survived everything that tried to break us, and now we get to create something new." The pregnancy progressed as Caleb recovered their lives, intertwining ever more deeply. He built a cradle with his own hands, working slowly, carefully, making it perfect. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, humming the same songs her mother had hummed to her. But the world outside their ranch didn't stop. News came that troubled them both: range wars brewing in neighboring territories, conflicts between cattlemen and homesteaders, the kind of violence that could spread like wildfire. It arrived at their store on a cold October evening, almost exactly a year after Evelyn had first arrived. A family of homesteaders, their wagon burned, the father badly beaten, 2 small children clinging to their injured mother. "Please," the woman gasped. They said you'd help. They said Caleb Boone protects people." Without hesitation, they took the family in. The father, Joseph Miller, told his story while Evelyn tended his wounds. A big cattle company wanted their land, had tried to buy them out, then tried to scare them off. When they refused to leave, the violence had escalated. "They'll come here," Joseph warned. "They said they'd burn out anyone who helped us." "Let them come," Caleb said grimly. But Evelyn, now heavy with child, had a different idea. "No more violence," she said firmly. "Not if we can avoid it. There has to be another way." She was the one who suggested appealing to the territorial governor using Thornton's legal expertise and the connections Marcus had. It took weeks of letters, testimonies, and careful documentation, but eventually federal marshals arrived to investigate the cattle company's intimidation tactics. The sight of Caleb Boone standing with the homesteaders, his reputation adding weight to their claims, made the difference. The cattle company backed down rather than face federal intervention and the possibility of going against someone with Caleb's skills. "You did that without firing a shot?" Joseph Miller said admiringly as his family prepared to return to their land. "My wife did that," Caleb corrected. "She's teaching me that sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword." Winter came early that year, but they were ready. The new barn was solid and warm, filled with enough hay to last months. The root cellar was stocked with Evelyn's preserved vegetables. The house itself had been expanded, a room added for the baby that was coming soon. It was during a December blizzard, naturally, that Evelyn went into labor. The snow was too deep to fetch Dr. Morrison, leaving Caleb to deliver their child with only the medical book Evelyn had wisely purchased to guide him. "I've never been more terrified in my life," he admitted as the contractions grew stronger. "You've faced down dozens of armed men," she panted between pains. "I knew what to do with them. This," he gestured helplessly, "this is life instead of death," she said. "You can do this. We can do this." 16 hours later, as dawn broke over a world made new by snow, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, strong and healthy, with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. "What should we call him?" Caleb asked, holding his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face. "Thomas?" Evelyn said, and when he looked at her in shock, she explained, "Not for my late husband, but for my father. Thomas Wayne Hart was a good man who deserved to have his name live on in better circumstances." "Thomas Wayne Boone," Caleb said, testing the name. "Tom for short." "Our Tom?" Evelyn agreed, exhausted but radiant. The baby changed everything and nothing. The ranch work continued, the daily rhythms of life unchanged, but now there was purpose beyond survival. Every fence mended was for Tom's future. Every horse trained was for the day he'd learn to ride. Every violent impulse Caleb controlled was to be the father his son deserved. Spring brought unexpected visitors. Marcus himself arrived older and grayer, but still carrying that infectious optimism that had saved both their lives. "I had to see it for myself," he said, looking around the thriving ranch, the happy family. "Caleb Boone domesticated." "Not domesticated," Evelyn corrected, holding baby Tom. "Civilized. There's a difference." Marcus stayed for a week, and during that time he made a proposal that would change their lives again. "There's a school starting in town," he said. "They need a teacher, someone educated, patient, good, with children. I may have mentioned your name, Evelyn. I have a baby who'll need education himself soon enough, and there are other children, dozens of them, growing up without proper schooling. You could make a difference." Caleb watched his wife's face light up at the possibility. "You should do it," he said, "if you want to. But the ranch, the house, will still be here, and maybe it's time we stopped hiding from the world and started being part of it." So Evelyn became the school teacher, riding to town 3 days a week, once Tom was old enough to be left with Mrs. Henderson, who was delighted to watch him. The children loved her, drawn to her gentle manner and the way she made learning feel like adventure rather than chore. Caleb, meanwhile, found himself drawn into town affairs as well. His reputation, once a thing of fear, became something else: respect for a man who'd chosen peace after knowing war, who protected those who couldn't protect themselves. He was elected to the town council, much to his surprise and dismay. "I don't know anything about politics," he protested. "You know right from wrong," Sheriff Patterson said. "That's more than most politicians." Their second child came 2 years later, a daughter they named Sarah, after the girl Caleb had once thought he'd marry. She was born easily with Dr. Morrison attending this time, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit. "Our family," Evelyn said, holding Sarah while Tom played at her feet. "Who would have thought it, the killer and the victim building something beautiful?" "We're not those people anymore," Caleb said, and realized it was true. They transformed each other, transformed themselves, become something neither could have been alone. But the past wasn't quite done with them. The letter came on a spring day when the world seemed perfect. It was from a lawyer in Virginia informing Evelyn that her aunt, a woman she'd thought long dead, had passed away, leaving her a substantial inheritance. She knew about Thomas, about what he did, the letter explained. She wanted to help, but was too ill to travel. This is her way of making amends. The inheritance was enough to transform their comfortable ranch into something more, to buy more land, more cattle to build the future they dreamed of. But it came with a condition: Evelyn had to return to Virginia, to claim it, to face the place she'd fled. "I'll go with you," Caleb said immediately. "What about the ranch?" "We'll hire help. This is important, Evelyn. Not the money, but the closing of that chapter. You need to face it as who you are now, not who you were then." The journey east was strange for both of them. Evelyn had never seen Caleb in cities and civilization. He was uncomfortable in the formal clothes required for legal meetings, constantly adjusting his collar, his hand reaching for a gun that wasn't there. But when they reached the town where she'd lived with Thomas, where she'd suffered so much, he was a solid presence beside her. People stared, some recognizing her, others just curious about the hard-looking man with the gentle way he helped his wife from carriages. The house where she'd lived with Thomas was empty for sale. They stood before it, Evelyn trembling slightly. "Do you want to go in?" Caleb asked. "I need to," she said. The house was smaller than her memory had made it, shabbier. The room where Thomas had hurt her so many times was just a room, 4 walls and fading wallpaper. The stairs she'd been pushed down were just stairs. "It has no power over me anymore," she said wonderingly. "It's just a house where bad things happen. It's not who I am." They completed the legal business quickly, but before leaving, Evelyn insisted on one more stop: the cemetery where Thomas was buried. Caleb tensed, but she squeezed his hand. "I need to do this." Thomas's grave was untended, overgrown with weeds. Samuel was buried beside him, a newer stone, but equally neglected. Evelyn stood looking at them for a long moment, then spoke. "I forgive you. Not for your sake, but for mine. You're dead and gone, but I'm alive. I have a husband who loves me, children who need me, a life you could never have imagined for me. I won, not through violence or revenge, but by surviving and choosing to be happy despite you." She turned to Caleb. "I'm ready to go home now." The journey back to Wyoming was lighter, freer. The inheritance money was substantial, but more important was the psychological weight that had lifted. Evelyn was truly free now, the last chains of her past broken. They arrived home to find the ranch thriving under the temporary management of Joseph Miller, whom they'd hired to help. Tom ran to them with the unsteady gait of a toddler while Sarah cooed in Mrs. Henderson's arms. "Everything all right?" Joseph asked. "Everything's perfect," Caleb replied, and meant it. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land, their expanded land now with the inheritance money already earmarked for improvements, Evelyn asked, "Do you ever regret it? The violence you did, the man you were." Caleb considered carefully. "I regret the necessity of it. I regret that the world required such violence. But if I hadn't been that man, I wouldn't have survived to become this one. I wouldn't have been able to protect you from Samuel, or help those homesteaders, or be the father our children need. So it was worth it, all the pain. Every second of pain was worth 1 second of this," he said, gesturing to their life, their family, their home. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Caleb tensed automatically, hand moving to the gun he still wore, but Evelyn placed her hand over his. "Wait," she said. "Look." The rider was young, barely more than a boy, and he was laughing as he rode, whooping with joy. As he got closer, they recognized him. Daniel Patterson, the boy they'd saved in the blizzard years ago, now grown into a young man. "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone," he called out, pulling up his horse in a cloud of dust. I got in the university in Denver. I'm going to be a doctor just like I dreamed. They invited him in for supper, listening to his excited plans, his dreams of bringing medical care to frontier communities. It was a reminder that their influence rippled outward in ways they couldn't always see. After he left, promising to visit whenever he was home, they put the children to bed and returned to the porch. The stars were bright in the clear Wyoming sky, the same stars that had witnessed their evolution from damaged strangers to partners to lovers to family. "I have something to tell you," Evelyn said quietly. "Oh, I'm pregnant again." Caleb turned to her, joy and concern mixing on his face. "Are you sure?" "Very sure. Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday while you were at the council meeting." "Another child," he said wonderingly. "In all my life I never imagined this, never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything good," she said firmly. "We both do. We earned it, Caleb. With blood and tears and choosing to trust when trusting seemed impossible." He kissed her, then soft and sweet, a world away from the desperate passion of their early days. This was deeper, surer, the kiss of two people who had faced the worst and chosen to build the best. "What do you think?" she asked. "Another boy or another girl?" "Doesn't matter," he said. "They'll be ours. They'll be loved. They'll grow up knowing they can survive anything because their parents did. And they'll know peace," Evelyn added, "the kind we had to fight for, but they'll get to inherit." As if in response to their words, young Tom called out from inside, probably waking from a dream. Evelyn rose to go to him, but paused. "Caleb, that first night when I arrived, did you think we'd end up here? That first night I thought we were two broken people trying to use each other to survive," he admitted. "I never imagined we were two broken pieces that would fit together to make something whole." She smiled, that radiant expression that transformed her face, that made her beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with joy hard-won. "We're not broken anymore," she said. "No," he agreed. "We're not." She went inside to tend to their son, and Caleb remained on the porch a moment longer, looking out over the land they'd claimed, the life they'd built. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, ranch worktown politics, the thousand small struggles of frontier life. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. He thought about the letter that had brought Evelyn to him, Marcus's words about salvation and second chances. His old friend had been right, but not in the way any of them had expected. They hadn't saved each other in some dramatic gesture. Instead, they'd chosen each other day after day through nightmares and blizzards, through violence and its aftermath, through illness and health. The sound of Tom's crying pulled Caleb from his thoughts, and he followed Evelyn inside to find their son standing in his nightshirt, tears streaming down his small face. At 3 years old, Tom was usually brave about nightmares, but tonight something had truly frightened him. "There was a bad man," Tom sobbed, as Evelyn gathered him into her arms. "He wanted to take Mama away." Caleb knelt beside them, his large hand gentle on his son's back. "No one's taking Mama anywhere," he said firmly. "Papa won't let them. Promise." Tom's green eyes, so like his mother's, searched his father's face. "I promise," Caleb said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The ghosts of Samuel Hart and Thomas Hart were long buried, but sometimes fear had its own memory, passing even to those who'd never known the original danger. They brought Tom to their bed that night, the boy falling asleep between them, one small hand clutching his mother's nightgown, the other wrapped around his father's finger. Looking over their son's head, Caleb and Evelyn shared a smile of understanding. This was what they'd fought for, what they'd survived, for these quiet moments of absolute trust and safety. The third child came with the spring wildflowers, another boy they named Marcus, after the friend whose letter had brought them together. Unlike his siblings' dramatic arrivals, Marcus came easy and quick, as if eager to join the family that awaited him. Dr. Morrison, now a regular visitor to the ranch, declared him the healthiest baby he'd ever delivered. "This one's going to be trouble," the doctor predicted with a grin, watching baby Marcus grab for everything within reach. "Got his father's determination and his mother's cleverness. Lord help us all." The ranch had grown considerably with the Virginia inheritance money. They'd purchased the adjacent property when old Sam Withers decided to retire back east, doubling their land and tripling their cattle. Caleb had hired several permanent hands, good men with families who built their own small houses on the property, creating a little community unto itself. Among them was Rodriguez, surprisingly enough. The scarred gunman had appeared one day, hat in hand, asking for honest work. "I'm tired of the gun life," he'd said simply. "Watching you choose different that day with heart, it got me thinking, maybe it's not too late to be something else." He proved to be an excellent foreman, his past giving him the authority to handle the rougher elements that sometimes drifted through looking for work. His presence also served as additional protection, though the need for such had diminished as Caleb's reputation evolved from feared gunman to respected rancher and councilman. Evelyn's school had become the pride of the town. She'd convinced the council to fund a proper schoolhouse, a two-room building with real glass windows, and a library that grew monthly as she spent her own money on books from Denver and even San Francisco. The students adored her not just for her patience and kindness, but for the way she made them believe they could be more than what the frontier seemed to offer. One of her students, Mary Chen, the daughter of the Chinese family who ran the laundry, showed particular promise. But the girl faced prejudice from some of the town's less enlightened citizens who believed education should be reserved for white children only. The issue came to a head at a town meeting where several men demanded Mary be removed from the school. "It ain't proper," insisted Jack Thornberry, a cattleman with more money than sense. "Mixing the races like that. What's next, teaching the Indians?" Evelyn stood to respond, but Caleb rose first, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Mrs. Boone's school is open to any child who wants to learn," he said quietly, but his tone carried the weight of potential violence. "Mary Chen stays, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with me, personally." The way he said personally left no doubt as to what such a discussion would entail. The objections died quickly after that, and Mary Chen went on to become the first of Evelyn's students to attend college, eventually becoming a teacher herself. It was during the summer of young Tom's 5th year that the past came calling one last time, though, in an unexpected way. A woman arrived on the afternoon stage, elderly but elegant, with silver hair and eyes that were startlingly familiar. Evelyn was in town that day, having taken the children to see the new general store, when the woman approached her. "Evelyn?" the woman said hesitantly. "Evelyn Hart." "Evelyn Boone?" she corrected automatically, then froze. There was something about this woman, something that tugged at memory. "I'm Margaret Hart," the woman said. "Thomas and Samuel's mother." Evelyn's hand went instinctively to her children, drawing them closer. Tom sensed his mother's tension and looked up with worried eyes, while Sarah clutched her doll tighter. Baby Marcus in Evelyn's arms began to fuss. "I mean no harm," Margaret Hart said quickly, noting the protective gesture. "I came to apologize and to thank you." "Thank me." Evelyn's voice was ice. "For surviving my sons," the old woman said sadly, "for becoming what they never allowed you to be." They spoke privately in the church, the only neutral ground Evelyn would accept, while Mrs. Henderson watched the children. Margaret Hart's story was one of long suffering and terrible understanding. "I knew what Thomas was," she admitted, tears flowing freely. "I saw the signs early, the cruelty to animals, the rage when denied anything. I tried to correct it, but his father encouraged it, said it would make him strong. After my husband died, Thomas got worse, and Samuel—" She paused, composing herself. "Samuel learned from his brother that power meant taking what you wanted." "Why didn't you warn me?" Evelyn asked, old anger rising. "When Thomas courted me, why didn't you say something?" "Would you have believed me? A mother speaking ill of her own son? And I hoped, God forgive me, I hoped, maybe you could change him, that love might succeed where discipline failed." "Love can't cure cruelty," Evelyn said flatly. "It just gives cruelty an easier target. I know that now. I knew it then, really, but I was a coward." Margaret reached into her bag, pulling out a leather folder. "I've brought something, documents. Proof that Thomas was violent before he met you, that there were other women who suffered. I thought if you ever needed evidence that you weren't to blame for what happened." Evelyn took the folder, but didn't open it. "I don't need proof anymore. I know what happened. I know who was to blame." I also brought this. Margaret continued, producing a small wooden box. It was my mother's and her mother's before that. Family jewelry that should have been yours as Thomas's wife, but that he sold for drinking money. I've reclaimed it. It's yours by right. I don't want anything from the Hart family. Evelyn began, but Margaret interrupted. Then take it for your daughter. Let something good come from our family name, please. Evelyn looked at the old woman, seeing her clearly for the first time. Margaret Hart was dying, she realized. The thinness, the pallor, the way she held herself as if each movement hurt. This journey had probably cost her greatly. You're ill, Evelyn said, not a question. Cancer, the doctors say. Months at most. I needed to do this before I faced judgment for my failures as a mother. Something in Evelyn's heart, the part that had learned compassion through her own suffering, softened slightly. Where are you staying? The hotel for tonight. I leave tomorrow. No, Evelyn heard herself say. You'll stay with us. Margaret's eyes widened. I couldn't possibly. You're dying and alone and trying to make amends. I know something about needing forgiveness, about trying to make peace with the past. Evelyn stood. My husband might take some convincing, but he'll understand. He always does. Caleb did take convincing, but when he saw the dying woman, when he heard her story, his resistance crumbled. They gave her the small room that had once been Evelyn's when she first arrived, and Margaret Hart spent her last week surrounded by the family her sons had tried to destroy. It was strange at first having her there. The children didn't know who she was beyond Mrs. Margaret who's sick, and she seemed content with that. She watched them play from her chair by the window, a sad smile on her face. They're beautiful, she told Evelyn one afternoon, strong like their father, graceful like their mother. They'll do good in the world. They will, Evelyn agreed. We're making sure of it. Margaret died quietly on a Sunday morning just as the church bells were ringing in town. Her last words were to Evelyn, You've shown me grace I didn't deserve. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. They buried her in the small cemetery on the ranch next to a baby girl Caleb and Evelyn had lost the previous winter, a tiny life that had lived only 3 days but was mourned as deeply as if she'd lived decades. The graves stood together, the Hart mother who'd sought redemption and the Boone daughter who'd never needed it, both at peace under the Wyoming sky. That fall brought changes to the territory. The railroad was coming through not to their town directly, but close enough to change everything. Land prices soared, and suddenly the Boone Ranch was worth 10 times what they'd paid for it. Offers came weekly from Eastern investors wanting to buy them out. We could be rich, like Caleb said one evening looking over the latest offer. Rich enough to go anywhere, do anything. What would we do with all that anywhere? Evelyn asked, settling beside him with her mending. This is our home. This is where our children were born, where we became who we are. Money can't buy that. But the opportunities for the children will come from what we teach them, not what we buy them. She set down her sewing. Caleb, are you unhappy here? He looked around the room at Tom practicing his letters at the table, at Sarah playing with her doll by the fire, at Marcus toddling determinedly toward his father's boots. He thought about the land outside the cattle and horses, the men who worked for him and respected him, the town where he'd found unexpected purpose. No, he said firmly. I'm happier than I ever dreamed possible. I just want to make sure I'm not limiting them by my contentment. Our children will have something better than money, Evelyn said. They'll have roots. They'll have the knowledge that their parents fought for and built something lasting. They'll have the strength that comes from knowing where you belong. The railroad brought prosperity, but also problems. The town grew rapidly, and with growth came elements that threatened the peace they'd known. Saloons multiplied, bringing drunkenness and violence. Prostitution arrived, followed by disease and despair. The quiet frontier town was becoming something neither better nor worse, just different. As a councilman, Caleb found himself in the middle of trying to manage the change. His reputation helped even the roughest elements thought twice about causing trouble when Caleb Boone was involved. But he couldn't be everywhere, and the town was stretching beyond what any one man's reputation could control. The crisis came when a group of railroad workers, drunk and angry over wages, decided to have some fun with the Chinese section of town. They set fires, broke windows, terrorized families. The sheriff, older now and overwhelmed, called for help. Caleb arrived with Rodriguez and several of his ranch hands, all armed, all deadly serious. The confrontation in the street was tense. 30 drunk railroad workers against a dozen men, but those dozen included Caleb Boone. "This ends now," Caleb announced, his voice carrying over the shouting. "You men get back to your camp, sleep it off, and tomorrow you apologize and pay for damages, or we settle this here." "You gonna shoot all of us, Boone?" one of the workers sneered. "You ain't that fast." "Don't need to shoot all of you," Caleb replied calmly. "Just you. The rest will run once you're down. Want to test it?" The moment stretched taut, balanced on the edge of violence. Then Rodriguez spoke up. "I'll take the second loudest. Johnson, you want the third?" One by one, Caleb's men called their targets matter-of-fact about the coming bloodshed. The railroad workers, realizing they were facing men who'd killed before and would do so again without hesitation, began to back away. "Smart choice," Caleb said. "Now get out of my town." But the incident showed him something important. The town needed law that didn't depend on one man's gun. He began working with the territorial government to establish a proper police force, bringing in trained lawmen from Denver. It was slow work, often frustrating, but necessary. Evelyn supported him through it all while managing her own challenges. The school had grown too large for one teacher, and she was training assistants while also raising 3 children and pregnant with a 4th. The strain showed sometimes in the tired lines around her eyes, the way she'd pause to catch her breath. "You're doing too much," Caleb told her one evening, finding her asleep at the kitchen table, lesson plans spread before her. She woke with a start. "There's so much to do. The school, the children, the house." "Then let some of it go. The school can manage with your assistance for a while. But the students need their teacher healthy and present, not exhausted and overwhelmed." He helped her to her feet, noting how her pregnancy was showing more than usual this early. "Evelyn, you can't save everyone." "You're one to talk," she said with a weak smile. "How many people have you helped this month alone?" "That's different." "How?" He couldn't answer because it wasn't different. They were both trying to fix a world that had broken them to create for others the safety and opportunities they'd lacked. It was admirable, but exhausting, potentially destructive. "Maybe we both need to slow down," he admitted. "Focus on our family for a while." The 4th pregnancy ended differently than expected. Twins, Dr. Morrison announced after a long and difficult labor. 2 boys, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament from the start. They named them James and John, and their arrival seemed to signal a shift in the family dynamic. Tom, now 7, took his role as eldest, seriously helping with the babies and watching over his younger siblings with protective intensity that reminded Evelyn painfully of Caleb. Sarah, 5, mothered everyone within reach, including her parents when they'd let her. Marcus, 3, was indeed the trouble Dr. Morrison had predicted, curious and fearless and constantly into everything. "We have a tribe now, Caleb said one evening, looking at their 5 children gathered around the dinner table. The twins were in their cradles nearby, one crying James, while the other slept peacefully. "John, our tribe," Evelyn agreed, exhausted but content. "Though I think we're done adding to it." "God, I hope so," Caleb said fervently, making her laugh. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the largest operations in the territory. Caleb had innovated in ways that other ranchers initially mocked, then copied selective breeding programs, irrigation systems, sustainable grazing practices learned from books Evelyn ordered from agricultural colleges. Rodriguez married that winter, surprising everyone by courting and winning. The widow Jensen, a woman as tough as she was kind. They built a house on the ranch property, and soon there were more children running around a small community growing where once there had been only isolation. It was during the spring of 1885 that Marcus visited again, bringing news that would change everything once more. He was older, grayer, moving with the care of someone whose body was betraying him. "I'm dying, Caleb," he said simply, sitting on the porch where they could watch the sunset. "Doctors give me a year at most." "Marcus, no, it's all right. I've had a good life, done some good in the world. But I need to ask you something." "Anything." "I have a nephew, Daniel. He's 14, smart as a whip, but heading down a bad path. His parents are dead, and he's been living with various relatives who don't want him. I thought maybe—" "You want us to take him in," Evelyn said from the doorway, where she'd been listening. "I know it's a lot to ask with 5 children already." "When can he come?" Evelyn interrupted. Marcus's face lit up. You'll do it just like that. You saved us both, Caleb said simply. Brought us together. Our entire life exists because of your meddling. Taking in your nephew is the least we can do. Daniel arrived a month later, angry and defensive and expecting rejection. He was thin, underfed with the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed too often. But Evelyn had experience with wounded souls, and Caleb understood anger that masked pain. It took time, patience, and more than a few confrontations, but gradually Daniel integrated into the family. Tom especially took to him, excited to have an older brother figure. The younger children simply accepted him as they accepted everything with curiosity and adaptability. The real breakthrough came when Daniel saw Caleb practicing with his guns, the daily ritual he maintained to keep his skills sharp, though he hoped never to need them again. "You're Caleb Boone," Daniel said with sudden understanding. "The gunfighter. Uncle Marcus told stories, but I thought they were exaggerated." "They probably were," Caleb said, holstering his weapon. "Marcus always did like a good tale. Could you teach me?" Caleb studied the boy, seeing the anger that could so easily turn to violence, the pain that might seek expression through hurting others. "Why do you want to learn?" "So no one can hurt me again." "Learning to shoot won't stop people from hurting you," Caleb said carefully. "It just changes how they do it and how you respond. But if you're serious about learning, I'll teach you. Not just to shoot, but when not to shoot, which is more important." The lessons became a bonding experience, not just about marksmanship, but about controlled discipline and choosing when violence was necessary versus when it was just easier. Daniel proved an apt pupil in more than just shooting. He absorbed the lessons about manhood that Caleb offered about strength, used to protect rather than dominate. Marcus died that winter peacefully in his sleep at a Denver hotel. He'd been visiting one more old Army friend making his final rounds. The letter informing them included a note in Marcus's hand. "Caleb and Evelyn, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. No sadness, please, I'm ready, and I've seen what I needed to see. You two have built something beautiful from the ashes of your pain. Your children will change the world because you changed yourselves. Thank you for proving that broken people can become whole, that love is stronger than suffering. Take care, Daniel. He's more like you both than you know. With all my love and no regrets, Marcus." They named the next year's foal Marcus, a beautiful stallion that would become Tom's horse when he was old enough. It seemed fitting. Marcus had always been about new beginnings, about potential recognized and nurtured. The territory became a state that year too, Wyoming joining the Union with all the ceremony and excitement such events generated. Caleb was offered a position in the new state government. Lieutenant governor no less, his reputation and respect having grown that far. He turned it down without hesitation. "Politics isn't for me," he told the delegation who'd come to persuade him. "I'm a rancher, a father, a husband. That's enough." But Evelyn was elected to the school board, the first woman in the state to hold such a position. There was opposition, of course, but having Caleb Boone as a husband had its advantages. Few men were willing to openly oppose something he supported. Tom was 10 when he announced he wanted to be a doctor. He'd been helping Dr. Morrison with his rounds, showing aptitude for healing that surprised everyone given his parentage. "A doctor," Caleb repeated, testing the word. "Not a rancher." "Maybe both," Tom said seriously. "Someone needs to take care of people out here." Sarah wanted to be a teacher like her mother, already helping with the younger students at school. Marcus showed every sign of becoming the rancher. Tom might not be already able to ride anything with 4 legs and rope a calf at 5 years old. The twins were still too young to show their paths, but James seemed drawn to music while John loved numbers. "They're all so different," Evelyn marveled one evening, watching their children, plus Daniel scattered around the main room, each absorbed in their own activity. "Good," Caleb said. "The world needs different kinds of people. We're raising them to be themselves, not copies of us." "Though a little copying wouldn't hurt," Evelyn said with a smile. "Your integrity, your courage, your intelligence, your compassion," he countered, "though hopefully without our wounds. Everyone has wounds. It's what you do with them that matters." Daniel surprised them all by announcing he wanted to study law. At 17, he'd grown into a thoughtful young man, the early anger transformed into a passion for justice. He'd been corresponding with universities, saving money from his work on the ranch. I want to make sure what happened to Aunt Evelyn doesn't happen to other women, he explained. Laws that protect the vulnerable, that punish abusers. That's a worthy goal, Evelyn said, tears in her eyes. Caleb paid for his education without Daniel knowing, arranging it through the bank as an anonymous benefactor. The boy had too much pride to accept charity from family, but he'd accept it from a stranger. Years passed in the rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch expanded again, now employing 30 families. The town grew into a small city with proper stores and a hospital where Dr. Morrison was chief of staff and where Tom would eventually train. Sarah did become a teacher, taking over her mother's school when Evelyn finally stepped back. Marcus ran the ranch operations with Rodriguez, learning the business from the ground up. The twins found their own paths, James to San Francisco to study music, John to Denver to become an engineer. Daniel became a lawyer, as planned, then a judge, eventually serving on the Wyoming Supreme Court. He married well, had children of his own, and never forgot the couple who'd taken in an angry orphan and given him a future. It was at Tom's wedding that Evelyn first noticed Caleb's hands shaking. He was 62, she 55, and they'd been married 32 years. The tremor was slight, barely noticeable, but she knew his body like her own. "How long, say?" she asked that night. "A few months," well, he admitted. "Morrison says it's just age." But it wasn't just age. The old wound, the metal fragment that had nearly killed him decades before, had shifted again. This time surgery might help, but it was dangerous at his age, with the fragment so close to his spine he might not survive. "I'll take my chances with the tremor," he decided. "Caleb, I'm not risking leaving you. Not now, not when we finally have everything we fought for." The tremor worsened over the next year, making it hard for him to shoot, to ride, to do the things that had defined him. But he adapted, as he always had, finding new ways to be useful, new definitions of strength. He was teaching his grandson Tom's boy, another Caleb, to ride when the pain hit. Sudden, sharp, dropping him to his knees in the corral. Evelyn was there in seconds, Tom right behind her with his medical bag. "The fragment's moved," Tom said after examination. "It's pressing on nerves. We need to operate." "No," Caleb gasped through the pain. "Dad, you'll die without surgery." "Might die with it too." "Caleb," Evelyn said firmly, "you're having the surgery. You don't get to leave me yet." The operation was performed in the new hospital, Tom assisting Dr. Morrison. Evelyn waited with all their children, even James and John, who'd traveled from their distant cities. Daniel was there too, having ridden through the night from Cheyenne. "He's the strongest man I know," Sarah said, holding her mother's hand. "He is," Evelyn agreed. "But even the strongest need help sometimes." The surgery took 4 hours. When Dr. Morrison emerged exhausted but smiling, the relief was palpable. "We got it," he announced. "That piece of metal that's been trying to kill him for 40 years. He'll recover." And he did, slowly but surely. The tremor was gone, though he'd never be quite as fast or strong as he'd been. But at 63, with a successful ranch, 6 accomplished children, and numerous grandchildren, he figured he'd earned the right to slow down. They were sitting on the porch one evening the following spring, watching the sun set over land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Tom was visiting with his family. Sarah had brought her children by earlier. Marcus was out checking the herds with his sons. The sound of life filled the air, children laughing, horses neighing, the distant lowing of cattle. "We did it," Evelyn said suddenly. "Did what? Built something beautiful from something ugly. Took our pain and transformed it into this." She gestured at everything around them, the prosperous ranch, the loving family, the community they'd helped create. "You did that," Caleb said. "I just tried to keep up. We did it together. Neither of us could have done it alone." He took her hand, still strong, despite the years, still gentle, despite everything. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, marrying a stranger, taking such a risk?" "Never," she said without hesitation. "Every hard day was worth it for this. For you. For them." She looked at him, her green eyes still bright despite the lines around them. "Do you regret taking in a damaged woman with nothing to offer but trouble?" "You offered me salvation," he said simply. "You offered me the chance to be more than a killer, more than a survivor. You offered me love when I didn't know I was capable of it. We saved each other. We did. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of shared life, shared struggle, shared joy. The sky painted itself in shades of pink and gold. The mountains stood eternal against the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of growing things of life, continuing its eternal cycle. Young Caleb, Tom's son, ran up to them breathless with excitement. "Grandpa, Grandma, Mom says the new foal is coming. She wants you there." They rose together, moving slower than they once had, but still strong, still capable, as they walked toward the barn where new life was arriving. Evelyn said, "I love you, Caleb Boone. After all these years, all these changes, I love you more than that first day I said it. And I love you, Evelyn Boone, more than I have words to express, more than I thought possible to feel." The foal was born as the last light faded, a perfect little filly that stood on shaking legs within minutes, already reaching for her mother's milk. It was a scene they'd witnessed dozens of times over the years, but it never lost its wonder life asserting itself, continuing despite all obstacles. "What should we name her?" young Caleb asked his grandparents. Evelyn and Caleb looked at each other, a lifetime of communication in that glance. "Hope," they said together, because that's what they'd given each other all those years ago when a desperate woman stepped off a stagecoach to meet a damaged man. Hope that the past didn't define the future, that love could grow from convenience, that two broken people could build something whole and beautiful and lasting. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, run by their children and grandchildren. The town they'd helped build would grow into a city. The students Evelyn had taught would become doctors and teachers and leaders. The lives they'd touched would ripple outward in ways they'd never know. But that night, walking back to the house with their family around them, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of their survival, their love, their choice to face whatever came together. The wind that had once carried only loneliness now carried the sound of family, of belonging, of home. Caleb looked back at the barn where the new foal was taking her first tentative steps, then at his wife beside him, their children and grandchildren spread around them like stars, and thought about that long-ago letter from Marcus that had started everything. His old friend had been right. They had saved each other. But more than that, they'd built something worth saving, something that would last long after the last ghost was laid to rest. The last nightmare faded. The last echo of violence went silent. In the vast Wyoming sky, the first stars were appearing, same as they had that first night when Evelyn arrived, frightened but determined. Now she walked beside him, gray-haired but still graceful, scarred but whole, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, building over destroying. "Ready to go inside?" she asked. "Ready for anything," he replied, "as long as it's with you." They entered their home together, the house that had grown from a fortress against the world into a sanctuary for family, from a place of mere survival into one of abundant life. Behind them, the Wyoming night settled over the land they'd claimed through struggle and determination, the land where they'd planted their roots so deep that nothing could tear them loose. The story of Caleb and Evelyn Boone would be told for generations, though the details would shift and change with each telling. But the heart of it would remain true, that two damaged people had found each other across impossible odds, had chosen love despite their wounds, and had built from their pain a legacy of healing that would outlast them both. The wind continued to blow across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the eternal promise of tomorrow, of new chances of redemption for those brave enough to seek it. And in the house where love had conquered fear, where trust had defeated violence, where hope had outlasted despair, a family gathered around the dinner table, heads bowed in gratitude for all they'd been given, all they'd earned, all they'd chosen to become. Outside, the new foal named Hope took her first confident steps into the world, wobbling but determined, falling but getting back up, learning with each moment that she was stronger than she knew, just like her namesake, just like the family that had named her, just like everyone who chooses love over fear, even when their hands shake until dawn with the weight of that choice.